Romanian Eagle. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 176, The Gap in Land Relations. In Romania at the end of November, the temperature has dropped to more than -10 degrees, and now people have put on thick winter clothes. But it is rumored from the palace, the news that the crown princess is pregnant has made people excited, and people are chatting about this topic. Andina, do you think the crown princess will give birth to a boy or a girl? On the street, a woman shopping for vegetables was talking to her friend about the pregnancy of the crown princess. I think it's better to be a boy, so as to ensure the continuity of the Romanian royal family. The woman named Andina expressed her expectations. In fact, everyone in Romania now hopes that Crown Princess Sophie Mary will bring new male members to the Hohenzollern family in Romania this time. In the past 10 years, Romania's economy has been getting better and better, and people's income has also increased a lot. Everyone knows who is responsible for this. Everyone is also worried about the fact that there are fewer members of the royal family. Therefore, after the wedding of the crown prince 2 years ago, people were looking forward to the Austro-Hungarian princess to give birth to a new member of the Romanian royal family. Now the crown prince finally has the news of her pregnancy. That's how the Romanian people reacted. Amid the excitement in Romania over the news that the crown princess is pregnant, Princess Sophie Mary, who is in the spotlight, is walking around the room accompanied by Edel. Now that Sophie Mary is pregnant, in order to prevent accidents, the royal family directly hired the most famous obstetrician and gynecologist in Romania, Dr. Marketina, who sits in the palace. Several experienced nurses have also been hired as a team of medical staff to take care of Sophie Mary. Edel, aren't you dealing with things today? Sophie Mary looked at her husband, who was with her, and said sweetly with a smile, nothing has happened recently. Besides, Prime Minister Bricianu will handle government affairs, and the army will be handled by the Chief of General Staff, Admiral Prician. I can take a break to relax myself, Edel said, and finally looked at his wife Sophie Mary. Talk about love. The most important thing is to accompany you well. While Edel was talking to his wife, there was a knock on the door. Edel was a little uncomfortable with the sound of disturbing him and his wife now, but he still shouted politely, "What's up?" A woman's voice sounded outside. "His Royal Highness, we are here to examine the crown princess." Come in. Hearing that it was for Sophie Mary, Edel could only let them in. After all, it was related to his wife and the fetus in her womb. As the crown prince's voice fell, Dr. Marketina walked in wearing a white coat with several nurses from the medical team. His Royal Highness, we are just doing a routine inspection to ensure that the crown princess and her fetus are developing, which will be completed soon. Edel also understands Dr. Marketina's explanation very well. This is not the era of very advanced medical technology in the 21st century. The current medical technology is still relatively backward, so for pregnant Sophie Mary, this is the best guard. His Royal Highness, please let me listen to your heartbeat. Dr. Marketina spoke to Sophie Mary with the hearing aid she carried with her. The crown princess has no problems and is very healthy, and I believe the fetus will develop well. Soon after Dr. Marketina's examination, he talked to the Edels about the results. Both Edel and Sophie Mary were satisfied with the result. After informing the two of the results, Dr. Marketina left, leaving the two to continue their sweet talk. It's a pity that the happy time is always short, and after being with Sophie Mary for 3 days, Edel began to deal with the accumulated things again. His Royal Highness, this is the statistics of domestic grain production this year. A guard took the statistics just now and put it in front of the crown prince. Edel put down the latest demographic report in his hand and started to check the food statistics table brought by the guard. In the population report he put down, Romania now has a population of 8.68 million. After deducting the 310,000 new population living in the newly acquired Bulgarian territory, the actual growth population has increased by about 600,000 compared with 1910. In 3 years alone, Romania has an average of 4.3% of the annual birth rate. The birth rate is also not up to paragraph. After deducting the average annual death rate of 2.1%, the Romanian domestic population can only achieve a natural growth rate of 2.2%. Fortunately, Romania can become a net importer of population by virtue of its high national income in the region. Most of those who became new Romanian nationals were from Transylvania and Bessarabia. Combined with the local Romanian majority, you can understand what Romania is doing now. Edel picked up the grain statistics table and started to read it. In the most distinctive position of the document, Edel saw that the total grain output in Romania reached a record high this year, with a total output of 10.316 million tons. Among them, the largest increase was for wheat and corn, which were 3.767 million tons and 3.631 million tons respectively. The ability to achieve such a high yield has a lot to do with the massive use of fertilizers in Romania. It should be known that before 1905, before Romania started industrialization, the fertilizer usage rate per hectare of arable land was 0.05 kilograms. It should be known that the use of chemical fertilizers per hectare in Britain and Germany was 16.7 kilograms and 18.7 kilograms respectively. Romania basically did not use chemical fertilizers. Excessive use of chemical fertilizers can easily make the land hard, but now European countries are using chemical fertilizers on a large scale to increase their food production to meet the growing population of each country. Now Romania's increasing total grain production is also closely related to its extensive use of chemical fertilizers and increased arable area. It's well documented in this statistical table, in which Romania uses an average of 7.46 kilograms of fertilizer per hectare of arable land. The area of arable land in Romania now reaches 6.711 million hectares, an increase of 10% compared to 3 years ago. This is also the result of the extensive use of mechanical farming in Romania, despite the fact that the majority of the area in the country uses stored farming. First, the big landowners in Romania have not completely changed their thinking and still adopt the method of subcontracting to farmers, while most farmers who rent land do not have the financial resources to buy tractors, and the landlords each buy a small amount of tractors are used on a small amount of land that has not been subleased out, and they cannot produce maximum benefits in terms of scale. Second, the price of producing tractors is not too close to the people, and many landowners cannot afford so much money to replace the machinery. Coupled with the fact that the production capacity of machinery factories cannot keep up with demand, Romania is still dominated by energy storage. However, a small gap has been opened in Romania's traditional farming methods and leasing relationships. Edel has reason to believe that in World War I, with the strong absorption capacity of industry, it forced the big domestic landlords to change the current traditional model and the way the land is cultivated. Chapter 177 The arrival of the year 1914. Time passed by in a hurry, and before I knew it, more than a month passed. Edel also spent Christmas with his parents and wife, and then the calendar turned to 1914. The situation in Europe is still tense, but there are many people who are optimistic. But Edel knows that this is the last time of peace in Europe. Just this year, the Allies headed by Britain, France, and Russia and the Allies headed by Germany and Austria will fight fiercely for their own interests. Romania's small physique is now on the sidelines, making last-minute bets. Recently, Edel asked the guards to hang a large world map in his office so that he could remind himself at any time. Romania is now sandwiched between the Allies and the Allies, not much better than the Balkan countries. Moreover, according to Edel's request, Transylvania and Bessarabia, the two Romanian occupied areas, need to be divided into Romania, which both sides of the Entente and the Alliance will not agree to now. Now that Transylvania is in the hands of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Bessarabia is occupied by Russia, even the arrogant Romanians must admit that neither of these two countries can compete with Romania's current small size. So Edel has only one preparation for this, and that is to wait until Russia is occupied by Ulanov, and until Austria-Hungary is almost unable to fight, even if the conditions given by Britain and France are reduced. Because then with the discoloration of Russia and the collapse of Austria-Hungary, coupled with the defeat of Germany, there will be a time window for power in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, although in the next 10 years, with the rise of the Soviet Union and the rearmament of Germany, this window period will end. But Edel took a fancy to this time period, and planned to control it during this time, which would be of great benefit to Romania. If the operation is good, it may not be impossible for Romania to win back the seat of an imperial power. Now Edel knows the situation in Romania for the future seat of the newly promoted powers in the previous statistics. Edel warned the government statistics department that the statistics are very important, so they should pay more attention to it. However, the statistical results this time are also worthy of Edel's warning, and the data is very detailed. One more thing to say here. Since the statistical survey at the end of 1910, Edel has handed over the statisticians to the government. Seeing that the statistical results are conducive to the adjustment of government governance, the government set up a special statistics department based on this group of personnel. Now there are more than 300 people specializing in this work. Edel looked at the statistical results of various Romanian statistics this year. Due to Romania's participation in the Second Balkan War, the economic development has eased compared with previous years. This year, Romania's gross national product, GDP, excluding the statistics of newly added territories, reached 6.301 billion lei, compared with 59.17 in the statistics at the end of 1912. Billion lei increased by 6.5%. The increase has been moderated. However, it is believed that with the improvement of the statistical department next year, the former Bulgarian territory will be included in the statistics, and Romania will have a substantial growth point. The main reason for the reduction in Romania's economic growth is the slowdown in the growth of the automobile manufacturing industry, which is its pillar industry. In Europe, Volkswagen's exports reached a new high, reaching an export volume of 521,500 vehicles, but the growth rate was only 3.8% higher than last year, and the export volume has entered a period of weakness. The European auto market further expanded, reaching 3.7 million units, an increase of 6.7%. More than half of the new vehicles are occupied by other European car manufacturers. This trend is most obvious in France and Italy, where Renault and Fiat have added a new car production workshop, which is also related to the increase in car tariffs in European countries has a lot to do with it. Previously, the auto tariff was only 15.7%. However, after automakers in various countries lobbied the government to increase vehicle import tariffs, there were generally 5-10% tariff increases, while Romania imported less from France and Italy, leaving it with no countermeasures. Industry is most important. Therefore, it is also the highest increase in the two countries, to reach an increase of 10%. Germany, Austria-Hungary and Russia only increased by 5%. 5.5%, and 6.1% respectively, because of their own interests, so that Volkswagen still guaranteed a good competitiveness. As for the UK, due to the dispersion of car manufacturers, although it also increased by 7.8%, tariffs do not hold much pressure on Volkswagen, which still dominates in this country. Although the export of complete vehicles has been hampered, relying on low wages and large-scale assembly lines, Volkswagen still occupies 68% of the European car market, and is still the number one target of car manufacturers in various countries. The export of parts and components benefits from the existing market size, so that the public also has very good benefits. According to the customs statistics at the end of the year, the export volume of auto parts in 1913 reached 64.123 million lei points. Due to the large-scale use of automobiles, the oil consumption in Europe has reached 8.65 million tons, of which oil from Persia and oil from Baku, Russia, account for 41% of the market. And Romania, because of the funds of the government and the royal family, also allows its oil to occupy 18.7% of the market share, and the remaining share is occupied by the American Oil Company, which was split by Standard Oil. It is worth mentioning that when the Standard Oil was split, Edel and the Romanian government demanded the redemption of the 12.5% stake in the Romanian Oil Company that Standard had previously invested in. I don't know whether it was because Europe was about to go to war or what, so Rockefeller agreed to Romania's move. To this end, Edel and the government used 45 million lei to buy back 12.5% of the Romanian oil company, and Standard Oil's move to quadruple the capital invested in the stock in 7 years was considered a beautiful talk at the time point. In addition to car and oil exports, Romania's other major export item is traditional food exports. In the statistics at the end of 1913, Romania's grain exports this year reached a new high of 3.17 million tons. Among them, the export of corn, mainly used as livestock feed, reached 1.36 million tons, while the export of wheat decreased to 874,000 tons, and the export of other types of grain was 936,000 tons, mainly crops such as barley, oats and potatoes. Among them, 39% of the grain is exported to foreign countries after deep processing. Edel can see from this data that the quality of life of the Romanian people is gradually improving. While the output of wheat as the staple food has reached a new high, the export volume is shrinking. It can be seen that a large amount of wheat is consumed by the people of the country. The sugar beet, which is the raw material for sugar extraction, is basically not exported, which also shows that the quality of life in Romania has been greatly improved. Even with the slow increase in the export of food and automobiles, Romania's total export volume has reached a new high of 1.378 billion lei this year, and the total import volume has also reached an all-time high of 1.198 billion lei. As the government's most concerned fiscal revenue, Romania has also reached a total tax revenue of 612 million lei this year, of which the largest contribution is the import and export tariff, which reached 147 million lei, followed by the industrial and commercial tax revenue of 67.4 million lei. Iraq, then the agricultural tax of 48.7 million lei, and the rest is all other total taxes. As for the value-added tax, which occupies the majority of the current society, it has no effect now. Edel did not study taxation in his previous life. Therefore, the Romanian government has taxes that are popular in all countries, and he does not know about the taxes that have not yet appeared. PS previously, Mantou suspended the update due to resignation and looking for a house, and now I want to make it up. As for time, take your time. Please remember this book's first domain name. Mobile version reading website, chapter 178. The financial budget of the year 114. Edel began to consider this year's budget after seeing the statistics of Romania's economy and population. Now Romania is taking a radical fiscal policy. This is because Romania has a lot of foreign debts and needs to pay 50 to 60 million lei every year to repay the debts. This money accounts for 10% of Romania's fiscal revenue, which is not a small amount. Sent along with the statistics, of course, this year's budget. Now Edel is looking at the budget plan for 1914. In this budget plan, the most important is the military budget. In 1914, the Romanian military budget reached the level of 128.5 million lei, which is much higher than that in 2013. You must know that, because of participating in the Second Balkan War, bring Romania's military spending to a record 261.24 million lei in 13 years. However, after deducting the cost of 151.42 million lei caused by the war, it is a lot more than in 2013. A large part of the extra funding compared to last year is part of the cost of the newly established 2 divisions. After deducting this part, the army replenishes ammunition reserves, and each division adds 6 105 howitzers, which is another sum of money, and then there are the costs of purchasing new equipment, army training costs, etc., which can only be maintained at the level of 13 years. Of course, as a guarantee of Romanian force, Edel still left room for the army. This year, the government's emergency funds reached the highest level in history, and a total of 55 million emergency funds have been prepared. It is mainly the financial assistance that Prime Minister Brătianu may need in order to prevent the newly occupied territories, as well as the preparations to prevent various natural disasters. After looking at the details of the military budget, which ranks first in funding, Edel moved on to look at the education budget, which ranks second in government budgets. Now Romanian education funding has always been ranked the second most important expenditure. This year is no exception. Its budget reached 115.4 million lei. Most of this is invested in 6-year compulsory education, but as funding increases, so does funding for secondary schools and universities. The Ministry of Education is now considering whether to add a university to increase the number of students in Romanian higher education. Now, with the increase of Romania's economic strength, there are a lot of earners from all walks of life, and their expectations for the education level of their children are also rising. According to the survey conducted at the end of 2013, Romania has 8,946 university students. Now, the existing 6 universities in Romania are basically operating at full capacity. If there are more students, it will cause a shortage of teachers and school buildings. University is not the most changed level of Romanian education, and now secondary school is the most changed level in Romania. Before 1905, out of an average of 106-year compulsory education students, only 2.5 would enter secondary schools to continue their studies. Most of them go home to work or go out to work after 6 years of study to help families reduce their burdens. In the final analysis, the income level of Romanian residents is not enough. After 8 years of development, Romania is now able to achieve 5.7 out of every 100 primary school graduates entering secondary schools, which is a huge improvement. Now, Germany, which attaches great importance to national education in Europe, can only achieve a 10% enrollment rate for junior high schools. However, this is not the highest. Now the highest enrollment rate in Europe from primary school to secondary school is Bulgaria, which has just lost the one next door. If you read that right, Bulgaria ranks first in Europe with a high secondary school enrollment rate of 17.2%. Far ahead of other countries. However, in terms of the number of college students, Bulgaria is far less dazzling than his middle school, with only 2,455 college students. In several European countries with similar populations, it can only be regarded as mediocre. In addition to military and education spending, the third largest budget item in Romania is the construction of public facilities, reaching the level of 87.6 million lei. Among them, 217 kilometers of railways are expected to be built, and 458 kilometers of maintenance and renovation. Among them, the newly built railway is the railway project from Ploiesti to the capital Bucharest via Bacău, Focnișa and Buzău. This railway extends along the line at the foot of the Carpathian Mountains, which can better solve the travel problem of local people. Of course, this is a rhetoric to the outside world. In fact, it can also facilitate Romania to quickly move the army to the border of Austria-Hungary. Edel also played this idea. Now this railway has been under construction for almost a year. According to the plan of the transportation department, the railway will be fully connected in 2.5 years. At that time, Edel said that he would not have to take this railway to inspect the local customs as for maintenance and renovation. This is also very understandable. Many of the current Romanian railways were built in the 1970s and 1980s, and too many facilities are already unusable. Now that government funds are abundant, these aging facilities also need to be replaced. So 34.1 million of this year's public utilities budget is spent on rail. In addition to railways, another major budget expenditure is the construction of roads. Now all Romanian counties have roads connecting their neighboring counties. Some counties with rich financial resources also subsidize the paving of asphalt pavement, while the poorer ones have only paved pavement with gravel. The existing 25 counties and cities in Romania also need a lot of funds, and the transportation department also has an ambitious plan to pave the roads connecting the counties with asphalt roads. So this area also needs a lot of funds. An amount of 31.45 million lei has also been prepared in this year's public facilities budget, so that officials of the transportation department are gearing up to make a big effort. It is worth mentioning that Romania now has 11,500 kilometers of roads, of which dirt roads and gravel roads account for 63%. So the wishes of the transportation sector still have a long way to go. In addition, Romanian seaports and river wharfs are also expected to spend about 9 million lei, of which the main expenditure is on the river wharf. In Giurgiu County, which relies on the Danube for transportation, The transportation department intends to turn the river terminal in the county next to the capital into a transportation hub on the Danube to expand the transportation volume of the Danube point. After looking at the public facilities construction budget, Edel moved on to the next major budget, which was healthcare. In this regard, the government has prepared a budget of 51.1 million lei, mainly to allow counties and cities to improve their medical standards. It has also combined private and corporate funds to greatly improve the medical level of Romania. Among them, the second largest national hospital under construction in Constanta is a representative of this aspect. The Constanta government, together with Volkswagen and the Romanian Steel Company, invested a total of 7.54 million lei to build the hospital, of which 45% of the funds were provided by these companies according to the plan. The hospital will have 800 beds and more than 120 medical staff. And more than 10 senior doctors from Britain and Germany will also be hired. According to the plan, it will reach the second level in Romania's domestic technology ranking, and the first certainly the Royal Hospital in the capital. In Ploiesti, IRC and other places, combined with their actual supporting enterprises and individuals, many new hospitals have been opened, but they are not as eye-catching as Constanta Point thanks to the improvement of medical conditions. The life expectancy of Romanian newborns and nationals has been greatly improved. Among them, the mortality rate of newborns before the age of 1 has dropped to the level of only 164 per thousand, which is 89 fewer than 8 years ago, which puts Romania on the same level as Spain and Portugal, and less than Austria-Hungary. Edel then continued to check budget items such as agricultural water conservancy budget, scientific and technological research and development budget, and resource exploration. Finally, he signed his name on the budget book, which represented that he accepted the quota allocated by the government. He doesn't care how many behind-the-scenes deals this budget has gone through. The most important thing for Romania now is to work hard to lay a solid foundation for the First World War starting this year. PS. Steamed bread is going home today, but don't worry, it will be updated, but the speed will be slower. When I come back, I will try my best to make the readers happy. Chapter 179 Dream, Part 1. Time is rushing away, and in a blink of an eye, it has come to the beginning of March. The cold winter has left people, and returned to the North Pole, and the trees on the fields are also green twigs. People take off their thick winter clothes, and put on light clothes, to welcome the arrival of spring. At the exit of the railway station in Constanta in the evening, a young man in his 20s, looked around as if he was waiting for someone to pick him up. Why hasn't Dopanov come to pick me up? The young man appeared to be in Constanta for the first time, and his accent seemed to have a hint of Slavic. In fact, it is true that his name is Ankosel from the Bessarabia region of Russia. After the 10th Russo-Turkish War for Romanian independence, the Bessarabia region was acquired by Russia as a reward. After more than 30 years of intentional or unintentional intervention by the Russian government, the local Romanian ethnicity will be affected more or less, so it is not surprising that this young man named Ankosel has a different accent. In his hometown of Ankesel, he is not a quiet person, and he does not want to be busy in the fields every day for life like his parents. Under the precepts and deeds of people who came to Romania to seek life in his hometown, he was also curious about the country of his family. There happened to be a man working in Constanta in the village next to him, so he pestered his parents to go out and have a look, and finally contacted a young man named Dopanov in the neighboring village who worked in Constanta, and asked him to help the child settle down for a while. Ankosel has long heard of the prosperity of this Romania's largest port city, and has also said through the hometown people who work in Constanta that it is no worse than Russia's largest port city in the Black Sea, Odessa. So he is also eagerly looking forward to it, but it is a bit late to see that this fellow countryman is here. Just as Ankosel was waiting anxiously, a rough hand stretched out from his side and patted his shoulder, and there was a familiar voice. Is Ankosel. Ankosel looked sideways, and found that it was his fellow countryman Dopanov who was waiting for him. This Dopanov was sweating a little on his forehead, and seemed to be rushing over. He saw Ankosel looking at him, and explained it casually. There is a traffic jam on the road today, and I came a little late. Facing the explanation of his fellow villagers, Ankosel didn't care, but said to him happily, Dopanov, I will trouble you this time. I really don't know how to thank you. Facing Ankersl's grateful words, Dopanov waved his hand and said generously, it's nothing. It's not too busy. It's also my honor to be able to help my fellow villagers. I hope you can find a good job. After chatting for a while, to enhance the relationship between the two, Ankersl almost called Dopanov, who was 2 years older than him, his cousin, and Dopanov naturally called him his cousin. Dopanov helped Ankersl get some luggage and told him, cousin, first go to my place to settle you down, and then accompany you to find a job. Anker is also very natural to say, then thank you cousin. We all belong to the same place. Where do we need to be so outside? I will now explain to you the classification of jobs in Constanta. Those are the best. The two chatted all the way to an open wooden pavilion on the side of the street. Dopanov said in the tone of someone who had followed him to Ankersl, who was looking around, this is the bus stop where we take the bus to the street, where I live. Facing Dopanov's words, Ankersl said with a smile and grateful words, good cousin. On the way from the exit of the train station to the bus station, Dopanov explained to him the classification of various companies that treat ordinary workers like them. Now among them, the best factory for them is the Volkswagen factory, because Volkswagen is doing well now, and because it is a royal industry. Wages and benefits are among the best in Constanta. He can get a salary of 123 or 30 lei a month, and his work is not heavy, and he has the opportunity to learn technology. Therefore, every time the public recruitment can attract a large number of people to apply. Many of them are workers in other factories. If you can't go to work in a Volkswagen factory, then the Romanian Steel Company is also a good choice. Because it is a state-owned factory, its salary is not much less than that of Volkswagen, but because the benefits are not as good as that of Volkswagen, the benefits are not comparable. In addition, the iron and steel industry is relatively hard, so in the hearts of many workers, the iron and steel plant is the second choice, but the iron and steel plant still attracts many people. As for the third place, there are many companies that do supporting facilities for Volkswagen plants and steel plants. There are large and small, there are thousands of people and only a few dozen people, and they all produce all kinds of cars. However, most of these enterprises are based on a piece rate system, and the guaranteed wages are very low. My cousin works there, but with his youth and ingenuity, he can also earn a good salary, but there are no other monthly benefits, and he is very tired after a day's work. You can tell from Dopanov's expression and his hands as for any other work. Of course, now that Constanta is developing rapidly, and large-scale construction is taking place everywhere, as long as you are willing to sell your strength, you can find jobs on these construction sites. However, various accidents occasionally occur on these construction sites, ranging from serious injuries to fatalities. Although the construction sites have to lose money, the amount of money is not huge. Generally, people who can find other jobs will not choose this kind of dangerous work. However, the treatment is not bad. There are more than 100 lei per month. People who need money urgently will still choose it. Then the lowest is various other industries, most of which are stevedores, catering waiters, etc. The monthly salary ranges from 100 to 80. The salary is low and the time is long. This is the last choice without other skills. The car is here. Look after your belongings. Dopanov saw a car with a square head and a square head coming over, and told Ankersl next to him. After the car was parked, the two quickly picked up his luggage and boarded the bus. After paying the fare to the conductor, he saw that there were 2 more seats, and Dopanov pulled Ankersl and sat on it. Dopanov turned to him. Good luck, there are still 2 seats. You know, when I came over, the car was almost unable to stand. Ankersl listened to Dopanov's words and looked at the modern city outside the window, thinking in his heart that he must stand out and take his parents over to live in the future so that they can see his son's ability. Dopanov saw Ankersl looking out of the window in a trance, thinking that he was fascinated by these tall buildings, and sighed to him. Charming, isn't it? Ankersl came back to his senses and did not dare to speak his mind, and told the cousin that he could only follow along. Yes, it's much more prosperous than our state, and it's a fascinating viewpoint. After hearing Ankersl's words, Dopanov sighed. I was also fascinated by it the first time I saw it, thinking about a better life in the future, and now I don't think so anymore. Why? Facing Ankersel's question, Dopanov patted him on the shoulder and said bitterly, "You'll find out later. I hope you keep your dreams alive." Dopanov was reluctant to talk about this topic and pointed out the window and talked about other things. "Now let me introduce you to the name of the place nearby, in case you use it in the future. This is Rayford Street. This street is basically where trading companies are located. The locals call it Trading Street. This is Crescent Street. There are all kinds of banks here. Have you seen the people coming in and out? They are all people with high status, and my boss Zately sometimes comes back." Under Dobanov's explanation, Ankesel felt vaguely that he wanted to live a decent life in Constanta, and it was not easy because Dobanov had just mentioned that his boss had a banquet. It took more than 1,000 lei to invite the Volkswagen purchasing manager to purchase more products from his factory. In the end, the two came to the place where Dopanov lived, and the architecture here was completely incomparable to the previous one. The building they looked at was like the bright face of Constanta, and here was its hidden ugly side. Low-rise houses, crumbling dim street lights, and littering rubbish on both sides of the road, as well as mice happily running on the rubbish, all describe the city's bottom life. Dopanov led him into a low 2-story building, through a narrow corridor, and came to the door of a room. He opened the door to put down his luggage, and said to Axel behind him, "Come in." When Ankosel came in, he saw that the room was only over 10 square meters. There was a bed and a seat with a gap, and there was a pile of dirty clothes in the corner of the room. It seemed that his cousin didn't like it either. "Take care of yourself. Just put things here. We can only squeeze it today." Anka put his luggage on the wall, and he was very tired after a day and a night of trains. After a brief meal with Dopanov, the two of them squeezed into a bed and fell into a drowsy sleep. As for their future, they also need to start tomorrow. Chapter 180 Dream, Part 2. The next morning, after an unpleasant night's rest, Ankel got up in a hurry. The reason for his unsatisfactory sleep was the Dopanov next to him. He was snoring, and his movements were not small. Ankesel was so tired that he was woken up by him after falling asleep last night. Until about 2 in the morning, the whole person was so sleepy that he fell asleep again. After getting up today, the whole person is still not too awake. After washing himself with water, Dopanov bought breakfast, which he told Ankesel during dinner. "Today, we will go to the labor market first, and if we are lucky, we will apply for jobs from Volkswagen and steel mills." Ankesel had his mouth full of food, and could only nod in response to the words of the newly recognized cousin. After breakfast, the two led by Dobanov came to the labor market not far from his residence. This place used to be an ordinary street, because there were many migrant workers nearby, and the nimble boss asked people to come here with a sign to recruit workers. Seeing the effect, many people came to recruit workers. As a result, it attracted a large number of workers. Come on. In the end, everyone knows this place, so this is a spontaneous labor market. Ankers looked at the migrant workers watching back and forth on the street in groups of 3 or 5, and the recruiters who had a wooden sign in front of them with job information written on them. Ankers felt his heart pounding, and he was going to take his first steps to success from here. Seeing Ankersel's excitement, Dopanov warned him. "Don't look at the wooden signs on both sides of the street. Those jobs are only chosen if you can't find another job." After saying this, Dopanov continued. "Don't walk around here. I went to a well-informed friend and asked if there was a better job today." In the face of this fellow countryman who was single-mindedly helping him, Ankers replied, "Cousin, go. I'll be waiting for you here." After receiving Ankersel's reply, Dopanov stepped forward and walked forward. Axel was bored and began to carefully read the information on the surrounding wooden signs. There was a wooden sign beside him that said, "Podok Construction Company recruited a large number of construction workers, and the salary was favorable and guaranteed at 120 lei per month, which could be settled every half a month." If Andersa hadn't remembered what Dopanov said yesterday, he would have gone over to ask. Although he didn't come forward to ask, the recruiter who was standing behind the wooden sign found him, only to see a kind-hearted middle-aged man approaching him. What is this young man interested in doing? The middle-aged man couldn't help but wait for his answer and continue to agitate him. "Our work here is not too tiring, and the work is easy. As long as you do well, you can earn at least 150 lei per month, which is considered a high salary in Constanta. We can say that we are better in terms of salary. Volkswagen factory. Young people think about it. Anchor has never encountered such a situation, and the whole person is a little bit at a loss as to how to answer. Seeing the behavior of the young man in front of him, this kind-hearted middle-aged man knew that this was the first time he was going out, and he was planning to continue encouraging him. At this time, a familiar voice came. Anchor, we should go. After hearing this, Anchor turned his head and saw that it was his cousin Dopanov, and he hurriedly told the middle-aged man, I'm sorry, my cousin called me. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left, leaving only the middle-aged man with a smile on his face. After seeing his prey leaving, the kind-faced middle-aged man immediately changed his expression and faced Ankessel with a vicious expression. The back muttered softly, you are lucky boy. Ankessel walked to Dopanov, only to find that behind his cousin stood a young man about his age wearing a jacket. He whispered to him when he saw Ankessel approaching. You are lucky you met the famous Nordary as soon as you came. After hearing this, Ankessel looked at Dopanov with a little doubt. His eyes seemed to be asking what was going on. Facing Ankessel's question, Dopanov explained, this is my friend Nasseri. He is very knowledgeable about recruitment information and can help you. Facing Dopanov's explanation, Ankessel smiled and reached out. Hello Mr. Nasseri. You're welcome. Who made you my friend's cousin? Besides, it's just a little favor. Nasseri held his hand as well. Then what happened just now? Following Ankessel's question, Nasseri told the story of his encounter with this kind-hearted middle-aged man Nordhari. It turned out that Nordhari was notorious in the labor market. He used his good-natured disguise to deceive migrant workers who wanted to make money with high salaries as bait, and tricked them into signing long-term labor contracts on the construction site. In fact, none of the migrant workers brought to the construction site by him received the high salary he said, only 70% at most, and they were basically doing the hardest and most tiring work on the construction site. Several people suffered from various accidents, injured or killed. Many people choose to leave because they did not get the high salary he said. At this time, they will find that they have been tricked into signing a labor contract that stipulates that they will pay a large amount of money for leaving, and most of the deceived people are you don't have that much money, you just have to keep earning enough to leave. The vast majority of the labor market in Constanta dislikes him, so now he can only trick new uninformed workers who apparently met his requirements before. After listening to Nasseri's explanation, Ankessel asked, a little puzzled. So no one cares about them? How? Nasseri said disdainfully. They all do it according to the law, and they don't make people work for nothing. Even if someone sues them, it's also in line with the law. I can only blame myself for being fascinated by the high salary at the beginning. People like him have completely corrupted us. The reputation of this industry. Many people are not coming to us for consultation now. After learning about this, Ankessel was terrified. If Dopanov and the others didn't call him, he might have been fooled by others. Now Ankessel asks what he is most concerned about right now. Where are we going now? This time it was Nasseri who answered him. Now Volkswagen and the steel plant are not hiring, but you are lucky. There is a factory that pays well and now wants people. It depends on your ability. Facing Nasseri's words, Ankessel asked with interest, which one is it? It's a newly opened factory for grain processing. It needs a lot of people and the treatment is good. It's too late for us to rush over while there are few people we know. After Nasseri explained it to him, he continued talking to Dopanov. You can also go this time. I heard that this factory has a royal background. If you apply for a job in your machinery factory, you can quit. Then I'll have a look too. After hearing Dopanov's words, Nasseri also spoke. If I applied for a job, I wouldn't do this anymore. Now it's getting harder and harder to help people find job information, but it's still safe to work. In fact, the grain factory negotiated by the three was also prepared by Edel for the royal family's industry to prepare for World War I. Now Romania's war-related industries are more or less influenced by him. Chapter 181 News from Austria-Hungary. The palace at the end of March was also full of greenery, but now there is only one member of the royal family in the Bucharest palace. The Carols took their wife, Sophie Mary, to the Peresh Palace for a holiday, leaving Edel to handle domestic affairs in the middle of the southern Carpathian Mountains, about 130 kilometers north of Bucharest. There is a 300-year-old fairytale-like and beautiful mountain town Sinaia, where the current Peresh Palace is located on a slope point in 1866, the Council of State of the then Romanian United Kingdom made a decision to invite German Prince Carol to be the King of Romania. In 1872, King Carol invited a German architect to design and build the Peresh Palace. After its completion, it has always been a vacation and rest place for their Romanian royal family, the Hohenzollern family. They come here to rest for 2 or 3 months every year, but now this year, because this is Romania's final preparation time before World War I, Edel, citing too many domestic affairs, did not come with his parents and his wife, who was 5 months pregnant with a bulging belly. Ed's focus now is on adapting the Romanian economy to the war that begins in the second half of the year. His Royal Highness, this is the latest imported raw material information. A guard took the latest list of raw material import statistics from customs and put it on Edel's desk. Okay, I know. Facing the report of the guard, Edel continued to deal with the report in his hand without raising his head. Seeing that the Crown Prince had no other problems, the guard quietly left the Crown Prince's office, leaving behind Edel, who was still working hard. You had stretched his back after finishing the business at hand. The document he was dealing with was the latest decree that the Romanian government intends to introduce to encourage farmland reclamation. In this decree, the government made a tax exemption for 5 years, as long as it is newly reclaimed farmland, and as long as each family can reclaim more than 2 hectares of new farmland, they can get the government's approval for the purchase of agricultural machinery allowance. After reading the decree carefully, Edel was still satisfied with the terms listed by the government. This fully took into account the actual situation in Romania, and the allowances given were also within the range of the government. Finally, Edel signed his name on the bill. After processing this document, Edel began to pick up the raw material statistics list that the guards had put on the desk and planned to look at it. Because the industrial mineral resources that Romania can provide is not rich, Edel also attaches great importance to the import of raw materials that can ensure domestic industrial operations. Especially now that the First World War is approaching, Edel intends to stock up a little, while the price is not too high now, to ensure the operation of Romania's industry. He is also heartbroken for Romania's economy. At this moment, there was a knock on the door, and Edel put down the information he was about to check, and shouted, "Come in." Just then the door opened, and a guard walked in. "What's up?" I heard this guard speak to Edel. His Royal Highness sent a telegram from Slavoria. The Grain Import and Export Association was established, and our people became the president of this association. This is the telegram. After hearing the news, Edel stood up and took the telegram from the guard and started to check it. This association is very important for Edel. Now Romania's 3 main export goods are petrochemicals, grains, and automobiles and their spare parts. Among them, petrochemicals are easy to manage because they only have one company in the country, and the automobile is also easy to manage because of the existence of Volkswagen, a car giant. There is only grain because of its decentralized nature, and there are only some local associations such as the Yaxi Grain Association and the Bacor Grain Association. Among them, various local food associations also. For various reasons, they are all fighting on their own, and some associations have internal disputes, so there has never been a national type of association. These are all things that Edel wants to take advantage of Romania's strong export of grain for the benefit of the country. That cannot be allowed. So he asked Viscount Adri, the head of the court, to find a suitable candidate for the various grain associations, to integrate the grain associations in the country through coercion and inducement. After nearly a month of hard work, the results are now in front of him, but thinking of the royal family to come forward, those land nobles have no sufficient reason to oppose the Romanian royal family, who is now in full swing. In the telegram sent, not only the news of the establishment of the Grain Import and Export Association, but also several important rules were written. Among them, the unified grain price and unified export that Edel attaches to the most are all written in it. In this integrated association, it is inevitable that there will be some people who can't see the situation clearly. I believe that they have used a lot of methods. As long as the results are good, Edel will not care about it. He is not God who can take care of all the sufferings of the world. Well done. After seeing this telegram that satisfied him, Edel showed a happy expression. With the establishment of the Grain Import and Export Association, most of Romania's grain exports are now in the hands of Edel. Although it is inevitable that there is no fear of death, these are irrelevant to the overall situation. As long as Edel can decide to export 3 million tons, whoever exports the food to will bring rich returns to Romania. After calming down his mood, Edel picked up the statistics list of raw materials sent before to check it out. Imports of industrial raw materials in this list also reached new highs, with the largest import value being rubber. For this gum, which originated in the Brazilian rainforest and is now expanding to Southeast Asia and South America, he can only import a little more to ensure domestic use in Romania. Whoever put Romania in the Black Sea has no external influence, except in the Balkans. It can only be purchased in advance and hoarded for slow use. The only imported raw materials after rubber are coal and iron ore. As the industrial base of Romania, coal and iron ore are now completely dependent on imports. This made Edel drool on the map, the Austro-Hungarian Bohemia region closest to Romania and the Russian eastern Ukraine region. It's a pity that I can't get enough of it, even taking advantage of the favorable opportunity of World War I. It is impossible to get it. Whoever let these two regions in Romania are too far away. The nearest ones are 340 kilometers away, and Britain and France will not let their own hands after the war, so Edel can only look at other places to start. Just then, there was another knock on the door coming. This time, it was the captain of the guard, Karist, who came in front of Edel and told the Crown Prince, His Royal Highness, we have just received news that the Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary intends to visit the region of Bosnia and Herzegovina in early summer. Chapter 182 Edel and -039, S ambition. Edel asked Kalosta, is the news confirmed? The captain of the guard, Karist, spoke uncertainly. The news was reported by Zagreb's Sporbrin Daily, which revealed that the Grand Duke will go to Bosnia to observe military exercises in early summer, and will then visit Bosnia and Herzegovina. Because he was afraid that his arrival would affect the trajectory of history. This year he asked the Chief of Guards to pay more attention to the news of Austria-Hungary, especially the whereabouts of Archduke Ferdinand, the Crown Prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Karist didn't know the intention of the Crown Prince, but he still carried out Edel's orders seriously. Now that there is no definite news in a newspaper, he also reported it to the Crown Prince in advance. After hearing Karist's uncertain tone revealing the source of his news, Edel was very sure that it was true. In his previous life, he wondered how Archduke Ferdinand encountered so many assassins in Sarajevo. Now it seems that the news was leaked 3 months in advance, so it makes sense to encounter an organized assassination. I saw that the management of intelligence by the Austro-Hungarian Empire was also a big omission. Seeing the contemplative Crown Prince Edel, Karist asked, Your Highness, shall we continue to follow the developments in Austria-Hungary? Edel returned to his senses and spoke to the captain of the guard beside him. Continue to inquire about Austria-Hungary's intelligence, but be careful not to expose yourself. After getting a reply from the Crown Prince, Karist left the office. Now he has a lot of things to do, not only pay attention to the intelligence of Austria-Hungary, but also cooperate with Milik to prepare Russian affairs, and also need to pay attention to domestic developments. Now he is too busy to even go home. Now the two major Romanian intelligence agencies are the Royal Intelligence Department controlled by Kalist and the Government Intelligence Department controlled by Milik. Last year, Edel personally redivided the scope of their respective jurisdictions for the two, one inside and the other outside, so as to avoid friction between the two due to their spheres of influence. It is only this year that the dynamics of Austria-Hungary are very important to the Crown Prince, so Kalist keeps an eye on the whereabouts of Archduke Ferdinand for himself. In this regard, Milik also cooperated with Kalist at the right time, not only handing over several important chess pieces lurking in Austria-Hungary to him, but also preparing a separate intelligence line for him. Therefore, the relationship between the two major intelligence agencies has gradually eased this year, and the atmosphere is not as tense as before. After confirming that Archduke Ferdinand will still visit Sarajevo for a death visit, then the historical line is likely to continue along the established track. Now the focus of Eda's attention is to hurry up and make Romania stockpile enough materials. He knew that the Ottoman Empire later fell to Germany because of the dreadnought. In order not to bring aid to Russia, it would be a great possibility to close the Black Sea Strait in the Ottoman territory to Romania. If Romania had the size of Germany, then the Ottomans would not dare to make such a choice. As for even the military spending of 1/10 of the poorest power Japan, how can they have the confidence to discuss with the Allies then, when the road to Romania's sea exit is completely blocked? Its land transportation will be used as the main means of transportation. Just open the map of Romania and you can see that there are not many neighboring countries, only Russia, Austria-Hungary, Seville. Bulgaria has 4 countries, just 2 alliances and 2 allied countries, but the direction of Romania's economic exports is Central Europe and Western Europe plus a Southern Europe. Having to pass through the territory of Austria-Hungary and Bulgaria, it is completely nonsense for the 2 countries to agree that Romania will export goods to Italy, Britain, France and other countries, so it is impossible. As for Russia and Serbia, they are not traditional markets for Romanian exports. Russia's grain exports are still competing with Romania and Europe. In addition, Russia's poor finances can't buy any goods, so Romania can only export to the Allies. Fortunately, the outbreak of World War I Allied maritime trade will be cut off, and the surrounding countries, except the 3 Nordic countries, are all enemies. Moreover, the food, oil, and automobiles exported by Romania are the necessities of life and the materials that can be used in the war, so in the early stage, they can only be exported to the allied countries to obtain benefits. However, since the surrounding countries are in a state of war, Romania, which can export in large quantities, is believed to be able to make good profits. It's just that Edel still has a worry that Romania has gained enough profits in the early stage, and will it become a thorn in the eyes of Britain and France, the defenders of the European order after the war? You must know that after World War I, the British and French libraries can run away. So whether Romania, which has gained a lot of economic benefits, can escape the extortion of the 2 countries will be a big problem. And Romania needs Britain and France to ensure that it will gain Transylvania from Austria-Hungary, which will become the key to its rise. Since the current dividing line with Austria-Hungary is divided along the southern line of the Carpathian Mountains, it can be seen from the map that Romania's territory is a large recess when facing Austria-Hungary. From a military point of view, Austria-Hungary's 100,000 troops can see Romania's 200,000 troops. Of course, this is without considering the gap in equipment. Moral point: it can be said that, if it hadn't always maintained a good relationship with Austria-Hungary, Romania would have been under the pressure of national defense, just like the Soviet Union, which had Mongolia in its previous life, fought against its own motherland. Therefore, Eda has always wanted to eliminate this disadvantage. As for the Bessarabia area currently occupied by Russia, I believe that under the threat of its Red Russia, the local people will be very willing to fall into the arms of Romania, a country of its own. However, this requires a high level of diplomacy, and now only the current Prime Minister Bricianu has this skill. Coupled with the fact that both Britain and France now consider him to be the leader of the Anglo-French faction in Romania, Eda can tolerate this prime minister who keeps making small moves. So don't look at Prime Minister Bricianu as docile as a cat here in Eda. In fact, as long as he leaves the palace, he is a legitimate Prime Minister of Romania, and he is also a strong Prime Minister. However, he is also very smart, and will only argue with Edel on some trivial matters. The Crown Prince takes into account the prestige of the Prime Minister, so most of them approve his proposals. This makes him a figure who can be balanced with Crown Prince Eda in the eyes of Britain and France, who is downright pro-German in the eyes of Britain and France. This makes Edel, who is determined to make Romania powerful, dumbfounded. In fact, he should be considered the leader of the German faction. After receiving the news that Archduke Ferdinand is going to visit Sarajevo as scheduled, Eda can only step up and urge all domestic industries to make preparations, regardless of whether these people understand it or not. Now he can only hope that everything will develop according to the course of history. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183, Gunshots in Sarajevo. 1. Time is not changed by anyone's thoughts, it moves along its own footsteps, and the Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary also changes with time. Twilight began to prepare to visit Sarajevo, but there was a group of people who didn't welcome him at all. At the end of March, the news that Archduke Ferdinand was going to visit Sarajevo in the Spolblan Daily had already been noticed by those who were interested. In Sarajevo, there is a group called Young Bosnia that is keen on national unity. One of the members of this group saw the news and sent it to Nidriko Chabranovic in Belgrade. After receiving the letter, Chabranovic handed it over lunch to Gavrano Princip, a Serbian nationalist living in Bosnia and attending school in Belgrade. He looked at the clip news and pondered, and finally, in the evening, he met with Chabranovic in a coffee shop called Kranz and proposed the idea of going to Sarajevo to assassinate Archduke Ferdinand together. Chabranovic was only 19 years old, and he was more of an anarchist than Princip, preferring to assassinate the Austro-Hungarian governor of Bosnia, Oskar Porciarek. According to his words, it was because the governor was a servant of the Habsburg dynasty and was sent to Bosnia to torture the Serbs. In the end, however, Princip persuaded Chabranovic by faith. Princip's suggestion is very positive, although they have no weapons, but they all have links to Serbian Black Hands. This can be done by the two of them with their help. Princip once participated in the National Self-Defense Forces, an organization founded in 1908 with the main purpose of resisting the annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina by Austria-Hungary. In 1912, he was trained in the National Self-Defense Forces, and the instructor was Major Vojislav Kosovic. This is also a fierce man who killed the Queen's brother with his own hands in Serbia's 1903 coup, and is also a greater Serb. After the outbreak of the First Balkan War, he hoped to smuggle Princip across the Ottoman border, to destroy its railways and bridges, to cooperate with the army's operations. However, Princip, who was only 18 years old at the time, was eliminated from the competition due to his thinness and illness, but he still maintained contact with the National Self-Defense Force. Later, a more radical organization was split from the National Self-Defense Forces, called the Unity or Death Organization, which is known as the Black Hand Society, and Princip continued to keep in touch with the Black Hand. The leader of the Black Hand Society is the Serbian intelligence chief Colonel Dragutin, who appeared earlier. And this organization is very mysterious, with heads, bones, daggers, dynamite and a bottle of poison printed on the banner of the Black Hand. This means that their members will kill themselves after completing the assassination operation. Princip and Chabranovic are not Black Hand activists, but know some of them, Milan Ciganovic being one of them. He had previously trained with Princip under Major Tankaswich, but did better than Princip in training subjects. And Ciganovic stole 6 grenades during the Balkan Wars. After listening to Princip's plan, Ciganovic was willing to provide hidden grenades, and suggested that the two carry pistols in case the grenades didn't explode. At the same time, it is best to ask the former instructor Major Tankaswich for help. Later, Princip approached Major Koswich to explain his plan, so the former instructor asked Ciganovic to train the two so that they would not miss someone. After a brief training session, Major Vojislav Tankaswich provided them with 4 Browning pistols and ammunition, 150 dinars in cash and potassium cyanide, which they could use to commit suicide after assassinating the Archduke. Obviously all of this is supported by the Black Hand. During the training, Princip found another person who was willing to go to Sarajevo with the two to assassinate the Austro-Hungarian Crown Prince. Grabarge was also a peripheral member of the Black Hand Society. After talking with Princip, he said that he wanted to go too, and Princip agreed with him considering that Rinduo would be assassinated. On May 26. The three arrived in the border town of Shakba, where Serbian Army Major Popovic waited for them, prepared a plan for their smuggling, and provided them with forged documents. Among them, Chabranovic will be borrowed to enter Zvornik on the Bosnian border. There will be another reliable person who will drive him to Tuzla and then take the train to Sarajevo Point. As for Princip, the pair will cross the Drina Rivernija Jesnica with weapons, and a Serbian customs officer will help them sneak across the river. In order to meet Chabri Nord in Tuzla, the two had to pass the police checkpoint in Lupa. Bold and clever, they took advantage of a farmer to leave weapons and ammunition in his car and passed by themselves. The weapons were retrieved at the checkpoint point. The three then met in Tuzla, where they handed the package containing weapons and ammunition to another accomplice, Misko Ivanovic. This man is both a good citizen, he owns a bank and a cinema, and a member of the Serbian National Guard. Ivanovic kept the weapons and ammunition in his attic, while the others continued to Sarajevo Point. While Princip and others were still in Bosnia, other helpers were already busy. Danilo Ilić was a school principal, a bank clerk, and a full-time radical nationalist. He took Princip and Chabrinovic back to his home, where he and his mother were the only ones. Ilić met the two when he last went to Belgrade. Princip wrote to Ilić in April, roughly speaking about the plan to assassinate Archduke Ferdinand, and suggested that Ilić recruit a few in Sarajevo, a local assassin. So Ilić was deep in it before the four came, and now he is getting deeper and deeper. After Ivanovic got the weapons and ammunition, he hid them in a box of white sugar, wrapped them in white paper, and trapped them with hemp ropes. He left the box of sugar in his friend's car for a while, unattended. Later, after receiving a message from Princip, Ivanovic took the weapon to Sarajevo and gave it to Ilić. Point after Ilić took over the weapons and ammunition, he locked it in a small box and hid it under the couch in his mother's bedroom. Point now the assassins from Serbia are already in Sarajevo, waiting for the visit of Archduke Ferdinand. Chapter 184 Gunshots in Sarajevo, Part 2. I don't know. Archduke Ferdinand, who is missed by others, is located in the hot spring town of Eliza, 10 kilometers away from Sarajevo. He has been here for the past 2 days to watch the exercise with Franz Conrad von Herzendorf, the Austro-Hungarian Chief of General Staff, who by the way also participated in the exercise. Commander-in-Chief. Point after 2 days of watching, Archduke Ferdinand was a little tired, but because there was only one last day left to visit Sarajevo Point. In essence, the marriage of Archduke Ferdinand was a kind of torture for the Archduke and his wife, because in 1900, the Austro-Hungarian Crown Prince was forced by his uncle, Emperor Franz Joseph I, to sign a waiver. In this statement, the children born from his marriage with his wife Sophie, a commoner, cannot inherit the throne. Point his wife Sophie Hotuk is not a commoner by reason. She comes from a Czech noble family. However, because her family is too humble, it cannot be matched with the Grand Habsburg family. Point in addition to this, Sophie was once the maid of a Habsburg Grand Duchess named Mary Christine, who was eager to marry Ferdinand. One day Ferdinand changed his clothes to play tennis and left the small gold box he carried in the locker room. The mother of the Archduke opened Ferdinand's small gold box, hoping to see a photo of her daughter, but this woman, what my mother seemed to be seeing, was a picture of the family's maid named Sophie. Point Ferdinand did not give up love for the dignity of the family. He planned to marry the secret lover. This caused strong opposition from the Habsburg family members, but Archduke Ferdinand still went his own way and married Sophie Hotuk, which made most members of the Habsburg family see it as a humiliation and refused to forgive him. Point his wife was not forgiven either, and although Sophie was eventually awarded the title of Grand Duchess Hornburg, she had to endure endless humiliation. At royal banquets, she had to be last, and she was always the last seat at the table, away from her husband. Even at Saturday's Eliza dinner, a religious banquet hosted by the Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary, Sophie was forced to sit between the two archbishops, patiently listening to her husband's pain, even though he was far from the palace in Vienna. No wife's toast. Ferdinand can no longer mention Sophie's name in public or official settings. Therefore, it is rumored that the Crown Prince Ferdinand went to Sarajevo this time to accompany his wife to relax, in order to relieve her huge pressure in Vienna. Point the work of welcoming the Crown Prince in Sarajevo has already been carried out. In his decree requiring citizens to show hospitality, Mayor Fahim has written down the driving route of Archduke Ferdinand, including Epic Street, to and from the city hall, the only way to go. He wrote the route in the hope that roadside citizens and shops would put the imperial flag and flowers on the street. In fact, on June 28th, the citizens of Sarajevo hung a large portrait of Archduke Ferdinand on the walls and windows, and Ilyich also summoned the assassins to distribute weapons, preparing to give the Ferdinands from afar a surprise. On this morning, he distributed weapons to the 3 local assassins he had recruited in Princip, who had come from Serbia. Princip had a Browning pistol, Chabranovic had a grenade, and Graberg had a Browning and a grenade. It was clear that the 3 of them were at the heart of the assassination point. He recruited 3 locals, the first 2 of whom were Serbs, Velis Chabralovic and Svetko Popovic. As for the 3rd person is a Muslim. This person's name is also very special, called Muhammad Basit. In the end, in the allocation of everyone's positions, Ilyich chose a position near the Chumuraya Bridge on Epic Street, with Popovic by his side. Chabrilovic, Mohamed Bast, and Chabranovic stood at key positions along the river. According to the line, the Grand Duke's convoy will first encounter 2 assassins with revolvers, and before crossing the Chumuraya Bridge, standing with Chabranovic, he is holding a grenade. If all 3 miss, Princip, armed with a Browning pistol, will do so before the convoy reaches the next bridge called the Latina Bridge. If they miss, the convoy will meet Graberg, the only assassin with a gun and a grenade. Not far from the Caesar Bridge point, the Ferdinands arrived in Sarajevo at 9:20, accompanied by the military governor Ploiesti. Today Archduke Ferdinand wears the uniform of an Austrian cavalry general, with a blue tunic, black trousers, and a red belt. Wife Sophie is also elegantly dressed, wearing a white tulle and hat with a bouquet of red roses tied around the hat. The Ferdinands first inspected the army upon arrival, then the archdukes boarded a royal convertible, and followed the lead car. The mayor and the police chief were in the lead car, and 3 vehicles of entourages followed behind the Grand Duke and his wife. 21 gun salutes were fired, and the royal parade began. The assassination plan designed by Ilyich is very clever, because it is multiple insurance. However, this plan has an obvious flaw, that is, it overestimates the dedication of the assassins. The 2 most critical positions in the assassination plan were given to the wrong people. One was Chabrilovic, a Bosnian who was neither trained nor timid. The second is Mohammad Bastard, a young Muslim who is probably not very serious about the Serbs. Not even a finger was moved as the convoy passed in front of them. It was the turn of the 3rd assassin, Chabranovic, who made his debut as an assassin from Belgrade. When the convoy passed the Chumuraya Bridge, he opened the back cover of the grenade and threw it at the car of the Archduke Ferdinand. Fortunately, the driver of the Archduke was quick to see what the assassin was doing, so he accelerated. At the speed of the car, the grenade brushed the face of Grand Duke Ferdinand and hit the hood, and was bounced away. It was under the accompanying car that was following Ferdinand. Then the grenade exploded directly. The explosion did not cause any serious damage to the car. The loss only wounded Ploiesti's adjutant, as well as a few passers-by on the side. Chabranovic jumped into the dry riverbed to escape, but was caught by the police before he had time to swallow the poison, if he wanted to. In the minutes after the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand was revealed, the Archduke's convoy accelerated, making the assassination attempt difficult. However, after seeing Chabranovic miss, Princip and Graberg, who were waiting for an opportunity behind the Grand Duke's driving route, evacuated their respective assassination sites for fear of police questioning. At this time, Archduke Ferdinand and his party arrived at the city hall, where they met with a delegation of Muslim women, and were preparing to give a public speech here. The scene of the speech is interesting. Under a pure gold Moorish awning in Ottoman tradition, Archduke Ferdinand is greeted by a group of Islamic scholars in turbans, bishops in religious attire, imams in Ottoman robes. It was almost 11 AM when the speech was over. According to the schedule, the museum should be visited and then lunch, but this is the most congested Joseph Street. Archduke Ferdinand's military advisor advised not to go to the museum, but to the residence of Ploiesti. Archduke Ferdinand is a person with a sense of honor. He chose to go to the hospital to condone the injuries of Ploiesti's adjutant and other personnel, and then go to lunch, which is also considered a good trip to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Since he had to go to the congested Joseph Street to go to the hospital, Ploiesti insisted that the motorcade go on Epic Street, which is not too wide, to try to pass at a high speed, to prevent anyone from throwing bombs at the same time. After the initial panic, Princip and Graberg got together again to discuss the next move. Among them, Graberg intends to use Caesar Bridge as his new position, where he hopes to shoot at close range, because the returning convoy will slow down here. And Princip also occupies a new position on the road to the museum. It is opposite the Latina Bridge, in front of Moritz Schiller's condiment shop. If Archduke Ferdinand sticks to the original schedule, then his car you will come from Epicway Street, turn right here, and slow down. Both chose to wait for the Grand Duke Ferdinand's team to slow down before starting, because they only had a few weeks of training, and it was impossible for them to hit the Grand Duke Ferdinand in a high-speed car. So the danger of publishing Archduke Ferdinand's driving route is shown. As long as the Archduke chooses one of the two destinations, his car will slow down in front of one of the two corners where the two assassins from Serbia are waiting for him. However, since Archduke Ferdinand insisted on choosing a third destination, and Ploiesti decided not to take the Joseph Street, and asked the convoy to proceed at full speed, these changes all weakened the possibility of the assassin's second attempt to succeed. If all goes well, then Princip and Graberg can only watch the car speeding past, unable to aim. The Ferdinands, Ploiesti and others, together with the police escort who came to reinforce, left the city hall after 11 AM and proceeded at full speed along the Epic Street. For the sake of prudence, the order of the convoy was adjusted. The police car drove the mayor's car to follow, followed by the car of the Ferdinands and Ploiesti, and there were 3 accompanying convoys behind. The Count of Herrick, a close friend of the Archduke, volunteered to ride the ploughman to the left of the Archduke, to prevent an attack from the river, where the previous attack was initiated. Now that the Grand Duke is in the middle of the high-speed convoy, it is very difficult for him to be attacked by bombs, and he will hardly be shot. Graberg stood near the Caesar Bridge, and could only watch the convoy passing by at high speed without turning. As the convoy approached the Latina Bridge, possibly due to Ploiesti forgetting to inform everyone, the first 2 cars turned towards Joseph Avenue, and the third car, carrying the Crown Prince and Ploiesti, followed. Realizing the mistake, Ploiesti ordered the driver to turn back, and the driver of the Grand Duke Ferdinand, just in front of the condiment shop, slammed on the brakes, and shifted hard into reverse. At this moment, Gavrano Princip saw the target stand still at a distance of 2.5 meters in front of him, and the time lasted for about 2 to 3 seconds. Although Count Herrick acted as a bodyguard, his position was on the other side of the car. Princip stepped forward, approached the target, and fired 2 shots from his Browning pistol, the first in the neck of the Volkswagen Archduke Ferdinand and the second in Sophie's stomach. The Grand Duke's car finally turned around, and headed in the direction of the official residence. The others in the car did not know that the gunshot hit the target. When it was discovered that something was wrong, the Ferdinands had died of serious injuries, and the Gavrano Princip, who caused tens of millions of casualties in the First World War, was quickly arrested by the surrounding police after the shooting. Sentenced to 20 years in prison in October 1914, Princip, who was in prison, underwent surgery to amputate his arm for health reasons, and died in prison on April 28, 1918, of tuberculosis. The other people involved in the assassination were sentenced to Danilo Iric, Nedriko Chabrinovic, Nijo Karovic, Mihailo Jovanovic. Yakov Milovic was hanged. On appeal, Karovic's sentence was commuted to 20 years and Milovic to life imprisonment. 20 years of hard labor for Princip, Chabrinovic and Graberg. 16 years for Vaso Chabrilovic. 13 years for Popovich. Every June 28, the above 5 people should be confined in separate cells. The remaining 6 were sentenced to 3 years in prison to life in prison. Only Mohammed Bast escaped to Montenegro, but was captured and executed in 1917. The upheaval caused by the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand has just begun. P.S. Mom, I'm sorry that my 4th shift has been delayed until today, but the steamed bread still fulfills my promise. If I don't sleep, go to sleep. Chapter 185, The Impact of the Sarajevo Incident, Part 1. The news of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand spread quickly in Austria on the same day. One of the first government officials to be informed was Konrad, the Austro-Hungarian chief of staff, who had left Sarajevo hours before the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. He had arrived by train from Sarajevo to Croatia at 10:30, to oversee military exercises there. Shortly in the afternoon, as the train passed Zagreb station, Baron Lehman, a cavalry general, entered Conrad's box and told him the terrible news. When Conrad's train arrived at Karlstadt, the last station, the official telegram had arrived, and the telegram officially announced that the heir to the Habsburg crown prince and his wife had been assassinated by a Bosnian Serb. Conrad made the right judgment. This was not the isolated operation of some lunatic, but organized crime. He believed that, in effect, the murder of Archduke Ferdinand was Serbia's declaration of war on Austria-Hungary. Such acts of war, he believes, can only be responded to with war. He immediately sent a telegram to Franz Joseph I, who was on holiday at the Villa Bad Ischl in the Alps, asking if he should interrupt the Croatian military exercise program and return to Vienna. The emperor replied, yes. The next night, Conrad drove straight to Vienna overnight. Conrad's character determined that he could deal with the news of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand with a calm and belligerent attitude, because he had the same stubbornness as Archduke Ferdinand. The chief of the general staff of the Austro-Hungarian army was a soldier by nature, and the assassinated Archduke Ferdinand helped him twice, 1906 and 1912, and only when the emperor did not like him. It can be said that Ferdinand single-handedly contributed to his chance to become the first person in the army. More to the point, the reason the emperor didn't like him was because in November 1911 the bellicose Conrad proposed to attack Italy, which at the time was an official ally of Austria-Hungary, and at the time was fighting the Ottomans. This suggestion made Conrad. Lad was in a bad situation. However, he is most hostile to Serbia. During the outbreak of the Bosnia and Herzegovina crisis, he kept asking his colleagues to completely solve the Serbian issue. Thanks to Germany's support, Vienna resisted Russian opposition and won European approval for the annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina by Austria-Hungary. And Serbia, without being able to stop it, got a breakthrough from elsewhere. In the First Balkan War, acquired a large amount of Ottoman territory. In the Second Balkan War, Bulgaria was also defeated because of Romania's participation. And with the support of Russia, some new territories in Bulgaria were acquired. The population of the territory increased by nearly half, and the prestige of Serbia was greatly increased. Austro-Hungary, on the other hand, also suffered a slump in popularity for its failure to intervene in the Balkan Wars. Not surprisingly, Serbs in Bosnia believed not only in national unity, but also in political terrorism. When Conrad saw that Serbia was capable of not only defeating the Ottomans, but also deterring Austria from intervening, for fear of Russian intervention, he began to fear that the Austro-Hungarian Empire had run out of time to solve the problems of the Slavic minority that had accumulated over time. In the first Austro-Hungarian cabinet meeting after the assassination, numerous high-ranking officials considered a report sent by Sarajevo. In the end, everyone agreed that many of the assassinations in Epic Street seemed to be carried out by Serbs in Bosnia. These people are all connected to the Black Hands in Serbia, but there is clear evidence that the root of the conspiracy is Belgrade. That quote, which Foreign Secretary Berthold told German Ambassador Churchky, was repeated over the next few weeks. The foreign minister said this because the Austro-Hungarian charged affairs in Belgrade had observed and sent it to him. He found out locally that after the news of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, the Serbian nationalists who were celebrating the festival were so excited that they were close to madness. Some people fainted in the arms of others because of their excitement. And someone said, "We've been waiting too long for this moment." After this cabinet meeting, everyone's opinions were almost unanimous. Prime Minister Count Steger supported war, War Minister Krobotin and Finance Minister Belensky also supported war, plus the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Chief of General Staff seemed to be Austria-Hungary. The upper echelons had decided to go to war. However, there is a high-level clear attitude against the declaration of war. That is, Hungarian Prime Minister Tisza was a feared figure in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a ruthless indifference, a man of few words, but a heavyweight. Of course, it is not only the Prime Minister's post that gives him such power, but also because of his family's huge influence in Hungary, not to mention Hungary's status in the dual empire of Austria-Hungary. His father, Tisza Kalman, served as the Prime Minister of Hungary for 15 years, 1875 to 1890, and even after he held the post of Prime Minister, the Hungarian government had to ask his opinion on many decrees. In fact, Tisza has no good feelings for Serbia. He hopes that Austria-Hungary will not intervene too much in the affairs of the Southern Balkans. If Austria-Hungary expands there, it will eventually only weaken Hungary's special status, because it will introduce more Slavic minorities. This will eventually transform the Austro-Hungarian Empire from a binary structure, Austrians and Magyars, to a triple structure. The attitude of Emperor Ferenc Joseph I is very interesting. He does not care which kind of policy the government uses, but insists on a principle, that no matter what kind of countermeasures the government adopts against Serbia, it must have the consent of Tisza, and strive to obtain the full support of Hungary. Tisza was approached by Foreign Minister Berthold in hopes of his support, and the Hungarian Prime Minister told the Foreign Minister, "I oppose war, because Russia behind Serbia will send troops to intervene, and it is unacceptable to declare war on Serbia without the support of its ally Germany." To this end, Tisza prepared a peace plan for the Foreign Minister to hand over to Germany. In this peace plan, its center is to pull Romania, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire into the Triple Alliance, thereby preventing Russia's ambitions in the Balkans. On the surface, this is Tisza playing with the politics of the Balkans with diplomacy, but in fact, it is to strengthen relations with Germany, let it be more deeply involved in the affairs of Austria-Hungary and the Balkans, and turn the Balkans into Austria-Hungary and Austria-Hungary. German Common Cause. In the face of the assassination in Sarajevo, Austro-Hungarian politicians could not formulate their own countermeasures without the consent of Germany. This reflects the strategic incompetence of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The reason why Austria-Hungary could not make a countermeasure is also the internal political structure of the empire. The high-ranking Hungarians have the ability to veto a policy on behalf of half the empire. However, Austria-Hungary consists of 15 nationalities, and it is almost impossible to separate domestic and international policies. Tisza's pacifist posture is also inseparable from his commitment to maintaining the status of the Magyars. Conrad and Berthold wanted to crush Serbia in order to weaken the tide of national independence within the empire. But if the two want to achieve this goal, they must first suppress the Magyars represented by Tisza. In this strange situation, Germany became not only the arbiter of Austro-Hungarian foreign policy, but also the solver of the institutional predicament of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now Austria-Hungary is waiting for Germany's attitude. PS Go to bed early today, get up and continue to update the code. Chapter 186, The Impact of the Sarajevo Incident, Part 2. Germany got the news of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand on the afternoon of the 18th. At that time, Kaiser Wilhelm II was sailing his luxury yacht in Kiel for a sailing race. Admiral Müller drove a motorboat, and threw the telegram containing the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand on the yacht of Wilhelm II with a cigarette box. Wilhelm II opened the cigarette case to look at the telegram inside, turned pale after reading it, and then the Kaiser ordered the yacht to turn back to shore. The reason why the Kaiser was emotionally depressed was because Ferdinand was one of his few friends at a royal party with the Archduke Ferdinand. The Kaiser, in order to circumvent the Austrian decree, made the table seat only 4 people, so that the Kaiser couple and the Archduke Ferdinand and his wife can only sit together, and the changed Sophie can only sit in the last embarrassment, and is now the heir of Germany's most important ally, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Wilhelm II did not have a harmonious relationship with the current Austrian-Hungarian Emperor Franz Joseph, and even if Austria-Hungary now asks Germany, it cannot change this phenomenon. Archduke Ferdinand was different. He and William II had a common understanding of European politics and diplomacy. If Archduke Ferdinand succeeds, the ties between Austria-Hungary and Germany will be stronger. Now that Europe is divided into 2 camps, Wilhelm II is very willing to see such a situation, but a gunshot in Sarajevo ruined the Kaiser's dream. When Wilhelm II rushed back to Berlin the next day, he found that none of his trusted ministers were there. Prime Minister Hollweg is on holiday at his country house in Hohenfenow. General Moltke Jr., the chief of staff, was in Carlsbad for medical treatment. Admiral Tirpitz, the Admiral of the Navy, spends his summer vacation in the Black Forest. Foreign Minister Giorgio is on his honeymoon. This means that the Kaiser has no advisors, so he can only deal with this balk and change point at this time. The German ambassador to Austria-Hungary, Churchky, sent a telegram hoping that Germany would agree to his cautious action, which made Wilhelm II furious. Who authorized him to do this? The Kaiser was still uneasy because of the death of his friend and saw such a report again. He scribbled a line of remarks in the margins of the report. This is absolutely stupid. He has no right to say anything about Austria. If something happens in the future, they will say, it's all Germany's fault. Please stop doing stupid things. Such a reaction from the Kaiser was also what Austro-Hungarian Foreign Minister Berthold hoped to see. Because of this assassination, the Kaiser turned his indifference to Serbia into hatred. On July 4th, Berthold sent his deputy, Count Oyas, to explain to the Kaiser how Austria-Hungary should deal with the assassination. In this diplomatic note to the Kaiser, Berthold made some changes without the knowledge of Hungarian Prime Minister Tisza. The biggest change was to eliminate Serbia's political influence in the Balkans, which meant war. Wait until Tisza finds out and asks to see the original diplomatic note. After seeing the largely redacted diplomatic note, he called to remove the redacted content. Unfortunately, it was too late. Oyas had already arrived in Berlin with Berthold's revised diplomatic note, and he had already arrived at the Kaiser's palace with this diplomatic note. During lunch with Kaiser Wilhelm II on July 5th, Oyas and Austro-Hungarian ambassador to Germany Szogeny took this diplomatic note to the Kaiser and informed him that this was the Austro-Hungarian Empire attitude. To their disappointment, Wilhelm II disagreed with the aggressiveness of the diplomatic note. Apparently the Kaiser has recovered from the grief of losing a friend. He calmly told the two that he hoped Austria-Hungary would take some important steps towards Serbia. But in this diplomatic note, the Kaiser felt that it might lead to a war in Europe. Wilhelm II's remarks did not discourage the two. They knew the emperor's character, so they continued to talk about the advice the Kaiser should give to Austria. At this time, the reckless side of William II appeared. Our actions against Serbia cannot be delayed. The Russian attitude is definitely hostile, but we have been prepared to deal with this situation for several years. If war between Austria-Hungary and Russia is inevitable, we will be on the side of our loyal allies. Russia is not yet ready for war, and will definitely think twice before using force. This was all advice given by Wilhelm II, and Szogeny recorded the Kaiser's remarks and sent it back to Vienna. The Kaiser's talk gave the Austro-Hungarian Empire hope. At this time, Wilhelm II summoned the military advisors who remained in Berlin in the palace and asked their opinions according to the diplomatic note sent by Austria-Hungary. The military advisors all believed that this was a sign that Austria-Hungary was about to go to war with Serbia, and they all agreed that the sooner Austria-Hungary went to war with Serbia, the better. And basically agree that, although Russia is an ally of Serbia, it will not participate in the war, so Germany does not have to conduct military mobilization, and the Kaiser can continue to take leave. This is very important. The next day, the Kaiser and Chancellor Hallwig summoned both Oyas and Szogeny. At that time, Prime Minister Hallwig was very sad because of the death of his wife, and he was very tired from traveling all the way. He had no idea how serious the situation was during the meeting with the Austro-Hungarian envoy. Hallwig believed that the time is better now, and there may be no good time to play. So far, the Kaiser and the Prime Minister have successively provided a blank check to Austria-Hungary. When they gave the blank check, they did not know that the Hungarian Prime Minister Tisza was firmly opposed to this plan. Wilhelm II left Berlin that day to board a trip to the Baltic Sea. Before that, he summoned the senior officers of the army and navy to inform them that Austria-Hungary was going to go to war with Serbia, while Russia and France were not ready for war. Prime Minister Hallwig also returned to Hohenzollern in the evening. In their opinion, it should be a task that Austria-Hungary could teach Serbia, while other major powers hadn't paid attention, and they didn't need to worry much. Essentially because of Tisza's objections, the war will drag on very late. The first evidence of the assassin's interrogation came before German support. Verified Serbian officer Major Tankovic in Belgrade. 3 assassins, Princip, Chabrinovic, Graberg, were trained. With this evidence, it would be difficult for Tisza to stop a war on Serbia. On the afternoon of July 7th, an emergency cabinet meeting was called at Tisza's request. At the meeting, Oyas, who returned overnight, recounted the content of his conversation with the German Prime Minister. Tisza was horrified after hearing about the raid on Belgrade and the partition of Serbian territory. He warned that if the Austro-Hungarian government directly used force without sufficient diplomatic efforts, the entire Balkans, except Bulgaria, would be hostile to Austria-Hungary. In time Bulgaria is interested, but Bulgaria, which suffered heavy losses in the Second Balkan War, will not give much help on the battlefield. In this case, Austria-Hungary is likely to be attacked on three sides in the war. To avoid this, Tisza proposed careful diplomatic steps before going to war with Serbia. First of all, it is necessary to make an unacceptable request to Serbia. If it refuses, it will be an ultimatum to make a threat of force. If Serbia accepts, then a diplomatic victory in the Balkans can be achieved. If refused, then the means of war could be used. However, Tisza mentioned that the goal of Austria-Hungary can only be to weaken Serbia and gain some territory, and absolutely cannot carve up Serbia. In the face of Tisza's request, Foreign Minister Berthold gave a different opinion, but still could not let Tisza succumb. Tisza then declared in his capacity as Prime Minister of Hungary that he himself was adamantly opposed to Austro-Hungarian occupation of any territory in Serbia, preferably to the benefit of the smaller Balkan states. In the face of Tisza's opposition, Conrad's hopes of preparing for the raid were dashed, and he could only start with diplomacy. Chapter 187, The Impact of the Sarajevo Incident, Part 2. At the request of Tisza, Foreign Secretary Berthold prepared a 48-hour response to the foreign traffic ultimatum. The ultimatum is as follows. 1. Seize any publications that cause hatred and contempt for the Austrian royal family. 2. Immediately ban the National Self-Defense Organization, Narodna Odbrana, and other organizations that promote anti-Austro-Hungarian propaganda. 3. Immediately remove any teaching content that may or may incite anti-Austro-Hungarian propaganda from educational groups and teaching methods. 4. Removal of officials in the military or administrative department who are accused of anti-Austro-Hungarian propaganda, and the list of such officials is provided by the Austro-Hungarian government. 5. Accept cooperation with relevant departments of the Austro-Hungarian government to suppress activities in Serbia that attempt to subvert the territorial integrity of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. 6. To take legal action to punish those who planned or carried out the assassination of June 28, 1914, on the territory of Serbia, with the assistance and direction of the relevant departments designated by the Austrian government. 7. Immediate arrest of the two named persons indicated by the preliminary Austro-Hungarian investigation. 8. Maintain cooperation and take effective measures to curb arms smuggling within its territory. 9. Explain to Austria-Hungary the remarks of senior Serbian officials in or outside Serbia who are hostile to them. 10. Take the above measures immediately and inform the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Berthold was preparing to issue an ultimatum to the Serbian government on July 12. But at this time a major event stopped him. First point at that time, the Russian ambassador to Serbia, Hartwig, visited the Austro-Hungarian ambassador to Serbia, Giselle. He expressed his sincere condolences to Giselle for the murder of Archduke Ferdinand. He suffered a heart attack inside the Austro-Hungarian embassy at 9:20 p.m. and died a few minutes later. The ambassador Hartwig was the driving force behind Serbia's participation in the Balkan Wars and the head of Russia in the Balkans. Austria hated him very much. Among them, after the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, all countries carried out solemn condolence activities, lowered their flags at half-staff, bowed their heads in silence, and expressed their sympathy for Austria-Hungary despite some pretentious element. Only Russia behaved abnormally at the embassy, not flying the flag at half-staff at both the Rome and Belgrade embassies. Even at the official Serbian memorial ceremony for Archduke Ferdinand, the Russians refused. Clearly this is what Hartwig meant. This led to rumors in Serbia that the Austrians had murdered Hartwig, which also delayed the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When the Austro-Hungarian Empire was stalled, Britain and France showed little concern for the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Among them, the United Kingdom is now struggling with the Irish Self-Government Act. After the British Empire annexed Ireland, the people of this small island have been dissatisfied with the British Empire's rule, especially during the Irish famine. For this reason, the British discussed the Irish Self-Government Act twice in succession in 1886 and 1892, but ultimately failed to pass the Gladstone government point after Asquith became Prime Minister last year. In order to gain the support of Irish MPs, the third self-government bill was introduced to the British Parliament in April 1912. Under this act, Ireland can establish a bicameral parliament, with members of the upper house appointed by the king, and members of the lower house elected by election law. But parliament has no power to deal with foreign relations, collect taxes, control land, and manage the police and army. Executive power remains in the hands of the British governor. The bill was also opposed by the Conservative Party. After many twists and turns, it was finally passed by the British House of Commons on the third reading, but was still rejected by the upper house. According to the British law of 1911, any bill, after the third reading of the House of Commons, can be directly submitted to the king for signature, regardless of the veto of the upper house. In this case, the Conservatives failed to block the Parliament, and turned to cause trouble in Ireland. The Conservatives, headed by A. Carlson, first instigated the Protestants in Northern Ireland to pass the Solemn Covenant on September 28, 1912. Threats to use all necessary means to smash the current conspiracy to establish a Home Rule Council in Ireland. Then, armed riots broke out in the north, causing a constitutional crisis in Britain. The Asquith government decided to send troops to quell the riots, but the officers refused and threatened to resign. After the northern riots planned by the Conservatives, the Irish side also formed a volunteer army, and the national war was on the verge of breaking out. So now the British Empire simply cannot take care of the assassination of the Austro-Hungarian Crown Prince. As for France, the KO scandal is now in the national spotlight. The murder, considered one of the biggest scandals in the history of the French Third Republic, took place on March 16, 1914, when Henriette Caillot, the wife of former French Prime Minister and then Finance Minister Joseph Caillot Gaston Calmet, editor-in-chief of Le Figaro, was shot dead. The motive behind Mrs. Caillot's murder was a series of personal attacks directed at her husband by Calmet. As a heavyweight in French politics at the time, Joseph Caillot's anti-war stance undoubtedly made him a thorn in the right wing. The editor-in-chief of Le Figaro, France's most important right-wing publication, launched a lengthy attack on the newspaper. Beginning in November 1913, Calmet claimed in the newspapers that Caillot had obstructed justice in a fiscal scandal during his tenure as finance minister in 1911, and that he had also accused Caillot of being too soft on Germany. Later, Calmet even broke the unwritten principles of the Parisian press and turned his gun on Caillot's private life. Calmet first made public the love letter that Caillot wrote to his first wife 13 years earlier, and Caillot's two-faced stance was revealed in his confession to his lover. The income tax is on the surface. Just because it is going to be implemented, I have to oppose it. Calmet also threatened to keep publishing the love letters between Caillot and his second wife, Henriette. Since Caillot and Henriette had other families during their love affair, this letter is undoubtedly evidence of adultery, enough to show Caillot's moral flaws. In order to defend his dignity, Caillot is bound to challenge Calmet to a duel. But before that, the unbearable Madame Caillot visited Calmet on March 16. After being allowed into the latter's office, Madame Caillot pulled out a revolver that had been prepared and fired 6 shots, killing Calmet instantly. Mrs. Caillot was arrested on the spot and confessed to the shooting. Such a good opportunity was wasted in vain. At the same time, French President Poincaré and Prime Minister Viviani took the battleship HMS France in Dunkirk and began to set sail for a visit to St. Petersburg. They are to consolidate the Franco-Russian alliance, but also to discuss the Balkan issue. In the eyes of France, the Balkan issue is not of much interest to them. They hope that Russia will focus more on Germany. This is the main purpose of the alliance between France and Russia, rather than focusing on the Balkans and Austria-Hungary. Obviously, they are also dissatisfied with Russia's aggressive attitude in the Balkans. After arriving in St. Petersburg on July 20, French President Poincaré proposed at a welcome dinner with Nicholas II. The Russian-French alliance was based on common interests, fear of Germany. This alliance is supported by the army and navy, and both sides look at each other. He also promised that His Majesty could trust France, and that France would cooperate with Russia in good faith and long term as in the past. However, the French president was unaware of Austria-Hungary's intentions, and by interpreting Austria-Hungary's telegrams, Russia knew that Vienna wanted to fight Serbia, which paved the way for the future. Afterwards, the French delegation visited the city of St. Petersburg and watched the life of various classes in Russia. At the last visit of the French delegation, Prime Minister Viviani, who also serves as foreign minister, ordered the French ambassador to write a communiqué summarizing the outcome of the summit. Ambassador Perolog drafted a brief manuscript at the dinner table. The two governments exchanged their views and intentions to maintain the balance of power in Europe. As for the Balkans, the two countries have absolutely the same views. Viviani disagreed with the final phrase of the manuscript, pointing out that French and Russian interests in the Balkans were not absolutely aligned. Paleolog, considering it was just a matter of wording, retracted the original manuscript. He redrafted another. The Franco-Russian alliance came to a full consensus on issues of peace in Europe, balance of power, and more so on the east. No one would doubt that it was Serbia. The tedious, but suggestive, communiqué then came in full agreement at the top of both countries. So far, France has given Russia a guarantee of the alliance without knowing it, and now it is up to Vienna how to respond. Chapter 188 Ultimatum. On the afternoon of July 23rd, when French President Poincaré and his party returned to France by boat, after visiting St. Petersburg, the Austrian-Hungarian Foreign Minister Berthold is finally ready to deliver an ultimatum to Salvia. This is really twists and turns. At the beginning, it was the proposal of Conrad, chief of the General Staff of Austria-Hungary, who planned to launch a sudden offensive against Serbia on July 1st, when all countries were full of sympathy for Austria-Hungary. It was only because Conrad was too ambitious that he planned to carve up Serbia so that the government could not accept it. A German-backed local war followed. According to Germany's expectations, at this time Austria-Hungary should have taken Belgrade by surprise. It is also because of the opposition of Hungarian Prime Minister Tisza that the trip has not yet taken place. And now Austria-Hungary's move has aroused the ideas of various countries, especially Russia, which has close relations with Serbia. The most deadly thing is that Russia has deciphered Austria-Hungary's telegrams and knows what Vienna will do next. At this time, Austria-Hungary, because of its own procrastination, dragged Germany, which had given it its guarantee, into the water. On the evening of the 23rd, Austro-Hungarian minister to Serbia Gisela handed an ultimatum to acting Prime Minister and Finance Minister Pacu. As for Serbian Prime Minister Pašić, who may have heard the wind, he left the capital on the 22nd to participate in elections, and has left Belgrade. Faced with the ultimatum submitted by Gisela, acting Prime Minister Pacu refused to accept the ultimatum on the grounds that Serbia was in an election and many ministers were absent. It's just that Gisela left the ultimatum on the table, as if to say, as you please. Then he turned and left. Serbia soon sent an ultimatum from Austria-Hungary to St. Petersburg. Russian Foreign Minister Sazonov said loudly, after receiving the Serbian telegram, "This is the Great War in Europe." In fact, Sazonov said this because he had not read the Austria-Hungary ultimatum, which was also a reflection of the Russian government in the 1908 Bosnia and Herzegovina crisis. In the Bosnia-Herzegovina crisis, Russia was forced to make concessions due to the trauma of the Russo-Japanese War. This is a shame for the Russian government, although it was later connected by the Russian ambassador to Serbia, Hartwig, to form the Balkan League. I got a lot of benefits from Ottoman, but the concessions in the face of Ottoman and Germany still stimulated the Russian high-level point in the Franco-Russian alliance just now. With the assurance of the French government, Sazonov does not intend to let Serbia back down half a step, otherwise Russia's influence in the Balkans will drop to an unbearable level. He first summoned the Austro-Hungarian ambassador, Szapary, and told him that Russia was firmly opposed to the two terms of the ultimatum. The Serbs would never disband the National Self-Defense Forces, nor would they allow Austro-Hungarian detectives to investigate the Sarajevo assassination on Serbian soil. Szapary explained that Austria-Hungary's prominence in suppressing terrorist movements and riots is beneficial to all civilized nations. Sazonov answered him, "This is a false statement. You are setting fire to Europe." After receiving the Austro-Hungarian ambassador, Sazonov called the ministers for a meeting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and issued an urgent notice that the Chief of the General Staff Yanushkevich and the Minister of the Navy Grigorievich should also attend meeting. Why did Sazonov, the foreign minister, have such great powers to hold meetings? It turned out that Geremakin, now the prime minister, was a figurehead, and now that Tsar Nicholas II is not there, the Tsar's yacht in the Gulf of Finland, he has the right to make decisions in his place. During the meeting, Sazonov asked the Chief of the General Staff to make preparations to put the Russian army in a state of combat readiness and to propose a partial military mobilization plan. Sazonov then ordered the recall of all diplomatic envoys, as well as officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Near East Bureau, and asked them to report the situation to him immediately. Treasury Secretary Barker was the first to respond to his plan, and at 11 AM he came to the Foreign Office. It was possible that Sazonov was away at the time, and he had a conversation with Schilling, aide to the Foreign Minister. Buck asked, "Is war possible?" Schilling said without hesitation. Sazonov thinks it's inevitable. In view of this, Buck wondered whether to transfer the Russian property in Berlin immediately. Schilling also said yes without hesitation. Buck immediately moved at the same speed as the Germans, ordering his Berlin agent to transfer the 100 million rubles deposited in the German bank to Paris and St. Petersburg before the Council of Ministers had even begun. Sazonov was discussing military mobilization with the head of the army at a time when Buck was rapidly transferring Russian assets out of Germany. At the end of November 1912, when the Balkan War was escalating, the Russian military minister Sukhomelnov drew up a partial military mobilization plan only for Austria-Hungary. His vision was to deter Vienna by force without disturbing Germany. Because Germany may mobilize its troops in fulfillment of its obligations to its ally Austria-Hungary, a key conclusion has been reached. Since Russia's Polish military district cannot mobilize troops, it is possible not to disturb the 8th Army in East Prussia. Now Sazonov is asking the Chief of the General Staff Yanushkevich to draw up such a plan, and Yanushkevich agreed to the request of the foreign minister. However, after returning to the General Staff, Yanushkevich summoned General Dobrowolski, the director of the Russian Military Mobilization Department, to discuss this local military mobilization plan. Dobrowolski told the Chief of Staff that it was a thankless folly, because if you want to effectively mobilize the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you must make full use of Warsaw as a railway transfer station. If the military mobilization does not touch Poland, it means that the attack on Austria can only be launched in the narrow Galicia or through Romania, which is also unrealistic. At 3 PM, the Council of Ministers held a special 2-hour meeting, as the convener Sazonov prepared 5 action proposals for discussion at the meeting. First, Russia promised to work with other powers to force Austria to extend the ultimatum. Second, Russia suggested that Serbia declare that it would not prevent the invasion of Austria-Hungary, but leave its fate to the great powers to arrange. Russia has just shipped a large shipment of arms and ammunition to Belgrade. Third, tomorrow the Chief of the General Staff and the Minister of the Navy will go to the Tsar's village to attend a meeting of the Privy Council. At the meeting, they will ask the Tsar to approve the military mobilization of the 4 military districts of Kiev, Ossad, Moscow and Kazan, and to put the Black Sea Fleet and the Baltic Fleet on combat readiness status. Interestingly, Austria-Hungary is not adjacent to either fleet. Fourth, the Russian army should start stockpiling munitions and prepare for war. Fifth, Russian assets must be withdrawn from Germany and Austria-Hungary. These 5 action proposals were all passed at this meeting. After the approval, Sazonov proposed to secretly mobilize, which was also agreed by the Chief of General Staff Yanushkevich. After the meeting, Sazonov summoned Serbian Ambassador Spalakovic. This time, the Serbian ambassador brought the latest domestic instructions. Serbian Prime Minister Pašić told the Russian Foreign Minister that the current state of the Serbian army was completely unable to resist the attack of Austria-Hungary, so he begged Russia for advice. Sazonov told the Serbian ambassador in front of him, asking them to toughen up. As a sign of sincerity, Sazonov suggested that Serbia accept the insulting ultimatum clause, but never Articles 5 and 6. He also persuaded Ambassador Spalakovic to allow Austria-Hungary to enter Serbia on its own, while Sazonov assured Serbia that Serbia would receive aid from Russia. The general idea is that Serbia can accept certain terms, but will never obey. If there is a war, Russia will fight for Serbia. After receiving the Serbian ambassador, Sazonov summoned the German ambassador Ploiesti. The German ambassador had been trying to negotiate the Vienna ultimatum with the Russians since the morning, but had been unsuccessful. Now facing the Russian foreign minister in front of him, Ambassador Ploiesti tried to localize the conflict between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, but this led to a strong rebuttal from Sazonov. He pointed out that Vienna's ultimatum undermined the solemn declaration made by Austria-Hungary to Serbia in March 1909 for the annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which obeyed the wishes of the European powers. Not only Austria-Hungary. After a bit of wrangling between the two sides, Sazonov finally started to talk about the main point. He spoke to Ambassador Ploiesti. I do believe now that Austria-Hungary wanted to find an excuse to annex Serbia. If that were the case, Russia would go to war with Austria-Hungary. Shocked by this, Ploiesti tried to reassure Sazonov. The worst result of the ultimatum was that Austria-Hungary launched a punitive military action against Serbia, not a territorial war, and Austria-Hungary had no plans to annex Serbia. However, the assurance of the German ambassador did not convince Sazonov, and then the two continued to talk without persuading the other. After talks with Sazonov were fruitless, Ploiesti sent a telegram to the German Foreign Office in which he reassured Jago, although Sazonov was vehement. But his purpose was to Europeanize the ultimatum. He does not expect Russia to intervene. And Sazonov received the last French ambassador Ploiesti that night. He told the French ambassador, Germany supports Vienna wholeheartedly and has no intention of calming the situation at all. So I told Ploiesti very frankly that we should not let Serbia and Austria-Hungary have a separate grudge. Sazonov made an astonishing decision in just a few hours on the Austrian-Hungarian ultimatum, and he did it himself without enlisting 3 other people who directly influenced Russian foreign policy. The Tsar was yachting in the Gulf of Finland, but he had already received an invitation to the Privy Council meeting in Tsar's village the next day. French President Poincaré is sailing in the Baltic Sea, returning to France. Serbian Prime Minister Pašić has yet to launch the Prime Minister's election and return to Belgrade. When the 3 wake up Saturday morning, they will see a different world. Chapter 189 The opening of the first battle. On July 25, Tsar Nicholas II held a meeting of the Privy Council in Tsaritst village. At this meeting, Nicholas II, the local military mobilization of the previous day was approved in principle, and the decision to mobilize only 4 military districts and 2 naval fleets. However, in essence, this military mobilization eventually covered the entire European part of Russia, including 6 military districts, not 4: Warsaw, Vilnius, Baltic Sea region, Kazan, Moscow, Kiev, Kazan, Ossad. The Russian pre-war preparations were divided into several stages. In the first phase, reservists need to be recalled, naval ships are returned to port to prepare for battle, troops are suspended from vacation, and cavalry are required to nail their horses, arrest spy suspects, and move valuables from border areas. The most important task is to deploy troops and weapons to border posts and to provide combat orders to frontline troops. This measure only requires the signing of an order by the Minister of War in the second stage. The scope of the recalled reservists will be expanded. Then Russian ports need to deploy mines, buy more horses and vehicles to transport supplies, and families of officers will be moved from border areas to safe areas. Recruiting narrow gauge rolling stock, that is, European standard gauge. Russia uses 5-foot wide gauge, and Russia needs to implement press control, which only requires the signature of the Minister of War. The French government, as an ally, is, of course, well aware of Russia's clandestine military mobilization. To this end, the French ambassador to Russia, Ploiesti, sent a telegram to the acting foreign minister of the country, Ploiesti Martin, telling the story of Russia's secret mobilization for Austria-Hungary's attack on Serbia. It was also informed that Dragic, the embassy attaché, had been stationed in the Red Village and served as the liaison officer for War Minister Sukhomlinov, and Grand Duke Nikolai. It was also on this day that Dragic received a secret instruction from the French General Staff to communicate with Russia on the principle of the inevitability of war in Europe. So the head of the French government is still sailing on the sea. The diplomatic and military liaison officers in Russia have entered a state of war, and they maintain contact with Paris in the process of secret military mobilization in Russia. At 3 p.m. on the 25th, the Serbian government ordered a military mobilization against Austria-Hungary, and Serbia began to transport central bank reserves and foreign ministry documents to the mainland. The garrison of the capital has entered field fortifications, and the munitions warehouse near Belgrade has also been moved. These were all seen by the Austro-Hungarian ambassador Gisle. He knew that Serbia would not agree to the ultimatum, and Austria-Hungary did not think they would agree. At 5:55, Serbian Prime Minister Pašić arrived at the Austro-Hungarian embassy, and Pašić handed the diplomatic note to Gisle, speaking in broken German. "We can only accept some of your demands. For those remaining demands, we can only count on your noble qualities as an Austrian general." This is the original story. Gisle rudely looked at the reply, and immediately made a judgment that Serbia's reply was not sincere. In this diplomatic note, Serbia did not even publicly apologize. He returned the documents to Pašić, who then notified Serbia, as he had not received a satisfactory response. He will leave Belgrade with the entire staff of the Austro-Hungarian embassy in the evening. Gisle didn't scare anyone, and his men burned the diplomatic codebook in a matter of minutes. Gisle, with his wife and the entire diplomatic corps, evacuated the embassy at 6:15 p.m., and on his way to the train station he saw soldiers on the streets, but the Serbian army did not detain him. At 6:30 he left Belgrade by train, and at 6:45 Gisle and his party entered Austria-Hungary. US historian Sidney Face said it set a record for the speed at which diplomatic ties were severed. The Austro-Hungarian government received news from Gisle at 7:45, and the military mobilization for the war was also after the foreign minister Berthold and the war minister Krobotin arrived at the palace to meet Franz Joseph. The aged emperor agreed to a mobilization for war. And at 9:23 a military mobilization order was issued by the war minister, Krobotin. In fact, with the efficiency of the Austro-Hungarian government, according to the words of Chief of the General Staff Conrad, it won't start until the 28th. Earlier Foreign Minister Berthold also discussed the military mobilization plan with him, but because of the summer holiday, in July the Austro-Hungarian army sent people back to collect grain. The director of the Austro-Hungarian army could not make the army advance in advance. End of vacation. Can see the chaos in the management of the Austro-Hungarian army. Moreover, Austria-Hungary's military mobilization order is also aimed at two actual situations. The B plan is for the Balkan operations, and the R plan is for the Russian operations. The two plans are actually mutually exclusive, because the battlefields are in opposite directions. Now it stands to reason that the B plan should be used to fight against Serbia, but if Russia mobilizes military first, then it will turn to the R plan, which will also cause confusion in the Austro-Hungarian army, and it will also be the same as Austria-Hungary's attack on Serbia. Troops are short. In Conrad's plan, Austria-Hungary needed the second week, August 12th, to prepare for an invasion of Serbia. Now Foreign Minister Berthold cannot wait. He believes that the Salvia problem cannot be localized by then, and Russia will definitely intervene. In fact, Russia has already started a secret military mobilization, and his vision has failed. As the biggest support behind Austria-Hungary, Germany did not return to Berlin until July 27th, when the Kaiser, the chief of the general staff, General Moltke, and the naval minister, Tirpitz, Prime Minister Hulwig, who came back 2 days before them, introduced them to the terrible situation in Austria-Hungary. Facing the violent Russian reaction to the current Serbian issue, Wilhelm II ordered the return of naval ships to the port of Kiel in response to a partial Russian mobilization. In fact, German intelligence officers had already spotted the Russian military mobilization. In Kiev, an artillery division was seen heading west. Intelligence officers in Riga also reported that the local army had begun laying mines outside the port. Above all, the German consul in Warsaw sent a telegram back. All the troops were recalled from the training grounds, and a large number of infantry and cavalry were transported from Brest to Leblinko and Vel, towns near Warsaw. For a whole hundreds of troops marched to and fro on the road from Brest-Litovsk in the evening. All these made the German government believe that Russia was not only mobilizing military forces against Austria-Hungary, but also against Germany. At 11:10 am on July 28th, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. The diplomatic note declaring war stated that the Serbian government did not meet the requirements of the note submitted by Austria-Hungary on July 23, 1914. This is also a fait accompli that Austro-Hungarian Foreign Minister Berthold hopes to fulfill, but he does not know that a 4-year-old European war has been ignited by him. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190 Romania, 039, S response. Edel watched the pre-war turmoil caused by the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Bucharest. He received the news the first time the Crown Prince was assassinated, only 10 minutes later than the Austro-Hungarian Chief of Staff. The situation was also the same as what he knew in his previous life. The countries refused to let each other, and ultimately rely on force, to resolve their disputes. After receiving the news of Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Serbia, Edel immediately recruited Director Adri, intending to stop the export of Romanian grain this year, waiting for this batch of grain to be sold at a good price. Your Highness. Look for me. As the head of the court, Viscount Adrien, although his hair turned grey as he got older, his hair was still meticulously combed, and he still looked elegant when matched with decent clothes. In the face of the Crown Prince's call, he rushed over quickly. Looking at the court director in front of him, Edel told him, let the Grain Import and Export Association make adjustments and suspend grain exports this year. After Viscount Adri heard the Crown Prince's words, he looked at the Crown Prince in disbelief. You must know that Romania's annual grain export volume is about 3 million tons, and now is the time to sign the bulk grain purchase contract. If Europe lacks Romania, a major grain exporter, a sharp rise in European grain prices is inevitable. And bulk grain exports are not only an economic account, but also a political account point. If Romania's grain exports are suspended, then the market share may be occupied by other countries, which will be a big blow to the newly established association. After all, the businessmen of the Grain Import and Export Association don't care whether you are a royal family or not. If you stop them from making money, there will be no good results. Viscount Adri inevitably hesitated. After seeing the hesitation of the court director in front of him, Edel couldn't tell him that the war in Europe would take 4 years, and he didn't need to worry about whether the food could be sold. Then he said the concerns of the palace chief. The situation in Europe is too tense now. Let's wait and see before making a decision. If those businessmen can't wait, you can buy it at the price of previous years on behalf of the royal family. Hearing the Crown Prince's explanation, Viscount Adri felt much more at ease. After all, he is not afraid of the grain exporter on the surface, and the big nobles of the land standing behind the merchant are not something that a small viscount can bear. Now with the Crown Prince's words, he thinks the problem is much simpler. Okay, Your Highness, I will send a telegram to the association to suspend the export of food. I believe those businessmen will feel the goodwill of the royal family. After Viscount Adri finished speaking to Edel, he was going to leave the Crown Prince's office, but Edel stopped him at this moment. Viscount Adrien, wait a minute. The palace steward turned and asked, is there anything else? The Crown Prince. Edel left his desk and walked to the palace chief and asked in a low voice, has my father been in bad health recently? Edel has been paying attention to the follow-up of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, and also pays attention to the reserves of various supplies in Romania, and the birth of his wife Sophie Mary is approaching. Carolai and his wife, who spent the summer in the Peresh Palace, were less concerned about it, but there was still news that his father's health had deteriorated recently, and he had not gone out for a few days. So Edel asked the palace steward to see if he knew anything. His Royal Highness. Viscount Adri said the wording he organized while thinking. His Majesty the King did feel unwell recently, but he is much better now. It's mainly because of His Majesty's own wishes, in order not to make you worry too much. Hearing the words of the palace chief did not dispel Edel's worries. After all, he was his father in this life. Moreover, Carolai is already an old man in his 80s. In this era, when the medical level is not as good as that of the previous life, any small problems that appear in this old man may become a big problem. Edel intends to go to the Peresh Palace to see after this period of work, and after all, he has to see it himself before he can rest assured. After Edel sent off Viscount Adri, there was still a lot to do now. In addition to the export control of grain, Edel also cares about Romania's strategic reserves. Now a large amount of raw materials imported from Romania are stored near Constanta, and the local warehouses are full. Now they are transported to various places by railway lines. Fortunately, government departments are doing them, otherwise he would not be able to care about them. At present, the domestic finance is just enough, and many things have no funds to implement. For example, the request of the medical and education department for funding new schools and hospitals cannot be met, and the transportation department requires that the renovation of old railways and the replacement of old locomotives can only be done in critical areas. The army has also always wanted to change the now backward reserve, but it has not been satisfied. When Pulishan inspected the reserves in various places, he also saw some militiamen training with Mannlicher 1871 rifles. These can be summed up in one sentence: is no money to make trouble. On the whole, Romania has developed well, but just like its own motherland in the previous life, there are still many places that need to be improved, which requires a lot of money to do it. It's just that Romania's fiscal year is more than £20 million. It is extremely eye-catching in the small Balkan countries, but it is not enough to compare with the major countries. Italy, which has the least income now, is more than 5 times that of Romania. Edel buried himself in his office dealing with domestic affairs. In the evening, he looked up at the crimson sunset in the sky and the lights gradually lighting up in the palace. He put down his work and planned to accompany his wife. Now Sophie Mary's body is getting heavier and heavier, and it is not very good to have no one around her to accompany her. His parents were on vacation in the Peresh Palace, where only he was considered family. Although noble ladies come to the palace to accompany their wives to relieve their boredom these days, what they still need most is their husband. Edel walked out of the office and asked the guard beside him, "Where is the crown princess?" The crown princess is in the rose room, accompanied by the Countess of Berwick. After hearing the guard's words, Edel walked towards the rose hall. The rose hall is famous because her mother likes to put a lot of books. In the past days, my mother called many literary people here to open a literary salon. If anyone in Romania is not invited to the Rose Hall, then he is not considered a country famous writer. And her wife, Sophie Mary, also likes the bookish atmosphere here, but she likes to gather noble ladies and celebrities to chat together. When Edel walked into the Rose Hall, she saw his wife, Sophie Mary, with her hands on her stomach, talking to a noble woman in her 30s. She saw Edel walked in and said happily, "Edel, are you busy today?" "It's done. I'll come and take a look when I hear you're here." Edel walked over to her and leaned down and said in a low voice. At this time, Mrs. Berwick was very winking and said to the Crown Prince and his wife, "Your Highness, I have to leave beforehand." After getting the approval of the Crown Prince and his wife, the lady left the Rose Hall with small steps. After seeing no one around, Edel spoke to Sophie Mary. "Have you been happy lately, my princess?" Sophie Mary tilted her head and pretended to think playfully. "It was fine until you came." Edel pretended to be annoyed and said, "I'm not as good as these people who chat with you." Sophie Mary looked at Edel's expression and smiled, watching her wife smile happily. Edel lay on his wife's lap and listened carefully to her abdomen. "Has our little cutie been doing anything recently? I kicked my stomach a few times today, and I will be as naughty as you in the future." Edel listened to his wife's words and felt very fulfilled in his heart. He has his own country and a happy family. Now a little life is about to be born, and he has left his own footprint in this world. Chapter 191 Affected Romania. Edel is accompanying his soon-to-be-born wife, and the situation in Europe is unfolding irreversibly. After the Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war on Serbia on July 28, Russia's military mobilization also changed from a secret state to a clear view of the operation, and 1.1 million reserve soldiers were mobilized by Russia into the army. In the face of Russia's poking attitude, Austria-Hungary, which screwed up, turned to its most reliable ally, Germany, for help. Facing the huge army that began to assemble in Russia, Kaiser Wilhelm II summoned important ministers to discuss After learning that Russia had been mobilizing secretly for a few days, Germany the next day asked Russia to cancel the military mobilization on the grounds that Russia's military mobilization threatened Germany's security, and to reply within 12 hours in the face of German demands. The Russian government ignored them. So Germany, under the signature of Wilhelm II, began military mobilization on July 31st. Military martial law began in Germany, the army stopped taking vacations, the soldiers began to return to the barracks, the news was controlled, etc. At the same time, Germany's most important railway system was also placed under the jurisdiction of the army. In the face of Germany's reaction, the French government, which has always regarded it as the biggest threat, also began military mobilization on August 1st, and at the same time, sent additional troops to defend the border with Germany. In fact, the French government has already begun preparations. When Russia began to secretly mobilize, France quietly assembled its troops in North Africa to major ports, and Germany's military mobilization allowed France to speed up its actions. Then came the familiar declaration of war moment. Russia declared war on Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary and Germany declared war on Russia, and France declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. Germany invades Belgium and Britain declares war on it. It is worth mentioning here that Italy, the Italian government stipulates in the Treaty of the Three Emperors Alliance, that war can only be declared when attacked, and only allies are attacked, so Italy remains neutral when countries declare war on each other. Even if Italy is neutral, Europe has already started a war that has been porridge, and Romania is also drawn by the warring parties at this time. In the palace, Edel has completely neglected to accompany his wife who is about to give birth. Now after the start of the European war, he is checking the latest news from various countries almost every day to see which one of them can be useful to Romania. Now he is summoning the Chief of the General Staff, General Prezhan, the Minister of the Army, General Courtois and other senior military officials in the office to check the latest battle report together. This is a telegram of the German army conquering the Liege fortress in Belgium. The Liege fortress is also well known in Europe today as a key point for the small Belgian country to defend against Germany. In the last 10 years of the 19th century, huge manpower and material resources were spent to build the Liege fortress. 12 permanent fortifications were arranged in a circle around the city. These forts are equipped with 252 artillery pieces of various calibers, and are densely populated with machine gun fire points and infantry firing holes. Holding the fortress was the Belgian 3rd Infantry Division, which consisted of 4 brigades and several other combat regiments with a total strength of about 36,000 troops. The fortress was destroyed by heavy artillery after holding back the Germans for 10 days, and now this telegram is in front of Edel and the Romanian military high-ranking. I didn't expect that the current military fortress was destroyed in a few days. It was unimaginable 20 or 30 years ago. After reading the telegram, General Courtois, Minister of the Army, said with emotion, "You must know that in the Russo-Japanese War 10 years ago, the Lushan fortress took 5 months and 61,000 casualties to conquer. The German army took only 10 days to conquer the Liang fortress, and it took 10,000 casualties to take this strong fortress." This made Admiral Courtois sigh that the world is changing too fast, and he is a little behind the times. Actually, this fortress is still functioning. Hearing the sigh of Admiral Courtois, Admiral Priest stood up and spoke. Without this fortress, the Belgian army would not be able to stop it for 10 days, let alone whether he would be able to complete the task of conscripting the army. In the face of Ploiesti, all the senior army officers present here nodded secretly. In the face of the attack of Germany, the most powerful army in Europe, even the Belgian King Albert sent all his troops over, and it is estimated that it is impossible to resist Germany's left hook. It just took a huge amount of human and material resources to resist for 10 days. Isn't it too much to lose? Lieutenant General Friet, who has only been serving as the Director of Military Education for a few months, expressed his consideration in terms of cost effectiveness in the past few months. Lieutenant General Friet has been cautious in his role as Director of Education. One is that he has no experience, and the other is that he is determined to give a good grade and let him get other colleagues' recognition. Because he knows that, if he wants to continue his promotion, he must not only have a good impression in the Crown Prince's mind, but also have a good impression in the minds of his colleagues. so he is deeply afraid that he has made undeserved mistakes. The military executives present also had some thoughts on Lieutenant General Ferit's words. This can also be used for reference. Romania also has many strategic points. Previously, due to low military spending and external pressure, the military did not invest too much money in these points. Among them, General Courtois, Minister of the Army, and General Pretian, Chief of the General Staff, were most deeply touched by this issue. In their drawer, there is already a drawer full of requests to build fortresses at strategic points. Edel also said, after thinking about the words of Lieutenant General Ferit on the issue of whether we still need to build a fortress, I think we can reduce the amount of construction. After all, the German army has already demonstrated this problem to us. But as to how much to reduce, we still need General Pilishin and Kuomintang. After General Artois goes back, let the staff do a deduction. We are not rich. We need to make the most reasonable plan with the least amount of money. Edel paused and continued. However, the coastal defense fortress still needs to continue to be built. After all, our navy is still too weak, and our port city is also an elite area that cannot be lost. Both Prešan and Courtois, who were named by Edel, nodded in agreement with the Crown Prince's words, and Prešan also spoke to the Crown Prince. His Royal Highness, after the meeting, we will ask the staff to do this, and we will definitely come up with a reasonable plan. After Admiral Pleasant finished speaking, a group of senior military officials looked at Rear Admiral Lumberton, the Minister of the Navy. The two lowest ranked generals who participated in this meeting, even if he was a minister, was Alexander. In the face of the Crown Prince's inquiry, Major General Lumberton could only speak after Pilishin spoke. His Royal Highness, our Admiralty is mainly working on the coastal defense plan of Varna for the current coastal defense fortresses. We plan to purchase 10 specially customized super long-barreled 240 cannons from the arsenal as coastal defense guns in Varna. As for other small ports, we will also prepare 5 210 cannons as mobile turrets to provide defense. After hearing Major General Lumberton's words, Edel asked with concern, so do you have enough money? Edel knew that the Navy's funding had always been low, and now the pressure on coastal defense is relatively high, so he asked to avoid unexpected situations. In the face of the Crown Prince's inquiry, Major General Lumberton said boldly, the funding issue is that the Navy can still afford it. After hearing the words of Admiral Lumberton, Edel was still satisfied that at least the Navy is still enough for now. Just then a guard came in, and he quietly walked over to the Crown Prince and said in a low voice, His Royal Highness, the King is back. I heard that the German ambassador Baslab went to the station to meet the King and had a few minutes with His Majesty alone. After hearing it, Edel calmly spoke to the guard. I see, you go down. Edel then continued to discuss with the top military officials about the impact of the war on the Romanian army. Seemingly indifferent to what he heard, only those who knew him well could see that in the ensuing deliberations, the Crown Prince said much less. P.S. Regarding the chapter about the outbreak of the previous station, Mantow should explain it here. This is not a paste copy. This is a condensed information about the book Check before and after the outbreak of World War I, which was bought by Mantow. After reading the bunts, I sorted them out by myself, seeing that everyone's reaction was a bit intense, so Mantow did not continue to describe it in detail. If you don't like the previous one, just skip it. Mantow plans to focus on Romania. Chapter 192, Carol 1 and -039, S thoughts. After discussing the current war situation in Europe with the military's senior management, Edel immediately put down other work in his hand and rushed to the residence of his father, Karolai. The interview of the German ambassador, Baslova, with Karolai was regarded as causing him a lot of trouble. As soon as the war broke out, Romania, which was in a good position, felt the draw of the Allies, and the Allies, the ambassador of Baslab and Austro-Hungary, Beli, rushed to the palace on the second day of the outbreak of the war. Del took out the terms negotiated by Germany and Austria-Hungary. In order to let Romania join the Allies, Germany and Austria-Hungary also made a lot of money. As long as Romania joins the Allies, the two countries promised to hand over the Russian-occupied Bessarabia and Suceava to Romania after the war, and the German ambassador Baslab also hinted that if Romania joins, then the important Russian port city of Odessa, the Saskatchewan region, can also be discussed. Point of course, in addition to these territorial commitments that need to be defeated, the two countries have also provided many visible benefits. Among them, Germany will forgive Romania's foreign debt of 227 million marks owed to itself, and will also provide free aid of 150 million marks. At the same time, Germany also provides its own existing technology to help Romania improve the level of various industries. The most important thing is that Germany will provide the poison gas technology it has secretly developed after Romania enters the war. It's funny to say that Edel, who is a traveler of later generations, has forgotten the chemistry knowledge he has learned, and has forgotten everything, except the two famous historical events of course. In addition to the benefits given by Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire is not bad. Austro-Hungarian ambassador Burley also offered the conditions given by Austria-Hungary, but due to its limited national strength, Austria-Hungary could offer much less. Austria-Hungary promised to provide 50 million kroner in free aid, and after occupying Serbia, they handed over the three areas of Brașov, Cavasna and Harghita in the Transylvanian salient to Romania. If it wasn't for the fact that the Allies were doomed to fail, Edel would have almost agreed. The conditions were too generous. It's just that Edel looked at the conditions of the Allies and could only politely refuse, for the same reason as Italy. They all signed a defensive alliance before, under the premise that Dear and Austria take the lead in attacking. Romania can only consider neutrality. As for the conditions of the Entente, they were looking for Prime Minister Brătianu, the famous leader of the Anglo-French faction in Romania. In the conditions given by Britain, France, and Russia, the Transylvania region of the Austria-Hungary Empire was assigned to Romania as a whole, and the three countries also provided assistance worth £15 million. The condition is that Romania invades Austria-Hungary from the Transylvania region and relieves the pressure on Serbia and Russia. It's just that Edel also rejected their proposal on the grounds that Romania does not intend to join the war at present. After both sides failed to draw Romania into their own camp, the German ambassador did not give up, and it seemed that he planned to start with King Carolai. In fact, this ambassador Baslab is very smart. When he interviewed Carolai, he did not start with the national interest. On the contrary, the king's family is also a branch of the Hohenzollern family. Now the Hohenzollern family in Germany needs the help of the Romanian branch. This made Carolai, who was very traditional in the aristocratic tradition of the 19th century, very tempted. In his perception, the family was very important. Now Edel is going to rush to put out the fire and let his father know that now as a royal family, the country is more important. When Edel arrived at the residence of Carolai, he saw his father resting on a reclining chair. In the fiery weather in August, the 80-year-old man was overwhelmed by such a long journey, and his face covered with age spots was full of exhaustion. Edel, here you are, take a seat. When Edel sighed quietly, the old king saw Ed's arrival, so he greeted his son to sit down. Edel was greeted by his father and sat on a chair in front of him. Edel organized in his mind how to persuade his father to speak, and made the room quiet for a while. Looking at Edel's expression of hesitating to speak, Carolai, who knew his son well, was the first to arrive. Edel, do you have anything to do with me? After being opened by his father, Edel had no choice but to ask. Father, heard that Ambassador Baslab approached you. Carolai, who knew what Edel wanted to say, also generously admitted. Yes, I don't know where the sensitive news of this Ambassador Baslab came from. I was blocked by him when I got off the train. After all, I'm also a diplomatic ambassador, so I chatted with him a few words. Carolai continued to speak after he had spoken about his encounter with Ambassador Baslab. Edel, I know that Romania is developing well now, but Romania can have the current development. Germany has contributed a lot, and the Hohenzollern family has also helped us a lot. Even I, the King of Romania, was only able to make it possible with the help of William I'm crowned the crown. So this time we Romania should help Germany through the difficulties, and this time Germany has given very generous conditions. Hearing the words of Carolai, Edel almost died. He didn't expect his father to become very nostalgic at this age, which caught him off guard. Now he must dispel his father's thoughts, otherwise Romania's current size is just a fish on a chopping board point, and now most of Romania's power has been concentrated in the hands of the royal family. As a prime minister who can contain the king's power, Edel has taken too much power away. He is only a large and important minister, and he can no longer compete with the king's power. If his father insisted on his own way, he would have no way to change it, unless he staged a coup. This is because Edel was deeply influenced by the centralization of power in the East in his previous life, and now Romania has gradually become one of the few countries in Europe that still has the supremacy of kingship. This pot still needs to be carried by himself. Father, now we don't necessarily need to go to war to help Germany. Now you see that every major country in Europe is fighting with millions of troops. Even if we are fully mobilized in Romania, we can't meet this requirement. And Germany is now in great momentum. We can observe it. And we Romania are completely prepared for this war. So watch and decide. Edel racked his brains trying to dispel his father's thoughts in the face of Edel's rhetoric. Caroline had a slightly different opinion. Edel, you are wrong. I remember that you foresaw a war in Europe a few years ago, so you reorganized your army aggressively. How can you be completely unprepared now? And the conditions given by Germany and Austria-Hungary this time are very rich, and it's totally worth our fight. Facing the words of his father Caroline, Edel wanted to slap himself. Obviously his words were wrong. Still, he continued to speak. Father, I think we only have one chance with the uncertainty of the current situation. It's too risky to get in now, and we've been doing well over the past few years, and going to war now will disrupt our economy's good momentum. So I think it's better to prepare slowly. After all, we don't know how long this war will last. It's better to join the war after both sides are exhausted. We still have a small population and can't provide too many troops. If there are casualties, the convention affects the status of our royal family in Romania. Seeing that his son was still unwilling to participate in the war, Caroline suddenly asked, "Do you want to join the Entente to fight?" Facing his father's sudden inquiry, Edel quickly denied it. Without this idea, the conditions given by Britain, France, and Russia are too few. I still think that it is necessary to join the German side. Now it is just to reduce our casualties. Now we Romania can't afford a battle with hundreds of thousands of casualties in each battle. After hearing his son's words, Caroline sighed and said melancholy, "Edel, I'm afraid I'm running out of time." Hearing his father's words, Edel, who was still planning to dissuade him with other reasons, was very surprised, and he asked quickly, "Why would my father say that?" In the face of his son's question, Caroline talked about his body. "I feel that my body has been declining very fast recently. At night, I dreamed of seeing your grandparents. They told me in heaven that they missed me very much." Hearing the words of Caroline, Edel put down the dust in his heart and thought about his father who loved him so much in this life. He comforted, "Father, it is estimated that you are too tired. As long as you have a good rest, you will still be healthy. You still have to wait to see the birth of my and Mary's child." Edel said that his eyes were red in the back, and his voice was vibrato. Looking at the appearance of his son, Caroline smiled and said to Edel, "I will wait until my grandson is born, and I will hold him in my arms and coax him to sleep." Edel didn't leave his father's room after he got Caroline's body near the end. Today, he does not intend to continue to monitor various affairs at home and abroad, but just wants to spend a good time with his father, who has not chatted with him for a long time. There was a loud laugh that had not been heard in a long time from Caroline's room today. Chapter 193. The public buried by orders. Happy times are short-lived. In persuading his father to give up the idea of participating in the war, Edel, who found that his father was dying, had to pick up all the things he was nervous about after spending a whole day with his father. Caroline, after Edel competed for Romania's war money, Volkswagen, as a leading company in Romania, fell into a hot environment. In the office of Volkswagen General Manager Minova, he is very busy. Hey, is that the general manager of Katursky? We need 10,000 tons of steel this month. The price is easy to say, you can increase it as soon as you need it, no problem. Now we have too many orders and we need so much steel, otherwise we will be finished. No order. Thank you, I will treat you to a big meal someday. No problem. Then please eat French food. Minoba put down the phone call he had just called to the steel mill, and before he could catch his breath, the phone rang again. Hey, it's me. France has an order for 20,000 1.5 ton trucks, and you tell them whether the price has risen. You have to tell them that it will take 3 months to pick up the goods. We can only produce so much now. If he is not satisfied, he told him that the German order came in front, and he was to blame for placing the order late. He also wanted to buy more than 800 5-ton heavy trucks in our inventory, and told him that they had been picked up by the British and Germans, and the order has also been placed in 3 months. If he wants to buy it, let him hurry up, and it is estimated that it will be 6 months later. After Minoba put down the phone, the door to his office was forced open with a bang. Minoba, who was startled, fixed his eyes and saw that it was De Rasper, the production supervisor, who walked in with sweat and frizz. Seeing De Rasper's rude actions, Minoba, the general manager, rarely suppressed his anger and asked, "What's in such a hurry?" De Rasper, who didn't hear Minoba's dissatisfaction, touched the sweat on his forehead with his hand and wiped it on the leather sofa in the office. Seeing the action of the production supervisor, Minoba, his boss, felt blue veins jump. But what De Rasper said when he walked up to him made him forget about his sofa. The factory has too many orders for trucks now, and it can't even complete the task, even if the shift is changed. What should we do? Hearing De Rasper's words, Minoba answered without thinking. Then go recruit. For the boss's suggestion, De Rasper immediately explained. I've already sent people out to recruit people. It's just that the truck line is running at full capacity, and more people won't help. Hearing De Rasper's explanation, Minoba knew that the production supervisor had an idea and just needed a nod of his own. He asked immediately, "What can you do now?" De Rasper immediately said the 2 methods he prepared. There are 2 ways now. The first is to build a new truck production line, but it will take at least 3 months to purchase equipment, build a new plant, transport equipment, debug and train workers. This is what we have already done, and workers can get started quickly with familiarity. Minoba interrupted him as soon as he heard that it would take 3 months. Just say the second option. De Rasper, who was interrupted by his boss, immediately said the second method was what he wanted. That is to convert the existing production line to make them produce trucks. We have studied that if the existing T-car production line is changed to a 1.5 ton truck production line, it only takes about 10 days, and many retrofit equipment can be used in domestic procurement. Only a small amount needs to be purchased from abroad, and the cost is not too expensive, only about 13 million lei. Minoba mused in his own mind about De Rasper's request to change the Model T line to 1.5 ton trucks. He is still very emotional about this perfect family vehicle that can seat 2 people and carry half a ton of cargo, and most importantly, this car, bringing Volkswagen and Ford to the top 2 of the world's largest automakers, is why he loves the car. But now the war in Europe is breaking out, and all countries are busy fighting. Sales of the passenger car market have plummeted by 70%, and the Model T, the king of the market, is no exception, and is now down 65%. 2 of the 3 Model T production lines in the Volkswagen plant have entered a semi-shutdown state. More importantly, I don't know how long this war will take, which makes Minoba, the head of Volkswagen, anxious. Fortunately, the passenger car market has shrunk because of the war factor, and the trucks that can be used for military transportation can only be used by him because of the good reasons of the war. Otherwise, he would have already thought of ways everywhere. How could he still be able to sit safely in an air-conditioned room? After thinking for a while, Minoba said to De Rasper, who was standing in front of him waiting for a reply, "You ask someone to come up with a modified production plan. I need to see it before I can make a decision." De Rasper immediately took out a folded piece of paper from his pocket, handed it to his boss with a smile, and talked about it. "I've already made the plan and it's here." Looking at the grinning appearance of the production supervisor, Minoba scolded for no reason. "If it weren't for your outstanding ability, I would have let you go away just like you." De Rasper, who smiled more brilliantly, had long been familiar with his boss's temper and knew that this was just caring for him, but he didn't forget to say it back. It's just that you are willing to be such a capable supervisor like me. Ignoring the presumptuous production supervisor in front of him, Minoba opened the sweat-smelling transformation plan and looked at it. On it is de Rasper's crooked writing, but Minoba sees the result after the transformation point throughout the retrofit package. De Rasper proposed to retrofit 2 of the newest production lines for the 3 existing Model T production lines. Among them, the production line with an annual output of 32,000 T-type vehicles can achieve an annual output of 24,000 1.5-ton trucks, after extending the assembly line conveyor belt, adding and modifying equipment to eliminate unnecessary processes. Another T-car production line with an annual output of 27,000 units will also reach an annual output of 21,000 units after the transformation is completed. However, in this plan, De Rasper mentioned that, if it is transformed into a truck production line, if you want to change back to the production of T-type cars, it will not be worth a loss. The 2 production lines that were originally capable of producing 59,000 Model T cars will only have a production capacity of 43,000 cars if they are changed back, so it is better to replace them with new ones. After reading the transformation plan prepared by De Rasper, Minoba was also worried about gains and losses, which was obviously a bet on the duration of the war. If the European war drags on for more than a year, then the transformation will be a huge profit. If it is finished in a few months, then the 2 truck production lines that have been transformed will be scrapped. Minoba was walking back and forth thinking, and De Rasper looked at his boss and knew that this was not an easy decision, and that if he made the wrong choice, Volkswagen, which was supposed to be lucrative this year, could be in vain. Minoba himself knew that, if he made the wrong choice, the cost of retrofitting and the purchase of new production lines would eat up this year's profits, but he made the decision considering the pile of truck orders. You go and rebuild those 2 Model T lines. Hopefully they'll last more than a year. De Rasper, who received the answer, nodded and said, "Okay, I'll let my subordinates work overtime to transform it, so that it won't delay the production of trucks." After speaking, De Rasper walked out of Minoba's office, leaving behind the boss who had just made up his mind. Of course, Volkswagen is not the only example of Romania getting the war dividends. Now there are too many Romanian companies that have made huge profits because of this war. Some of them took the opportunity to become bigger and stronger, while others were reluctant to forge ahead and were overwhelmed by their competitors after the war. However, this war also gave Romania's newly developed industrial system enough profit and gave Edel an opportunity to grow this little sapling called industrialization by himself. But the most lucrative is of course not the automobile manufacturing industry, but also other industries related to the war. Chapter 194 The Battle for Oil. 1. While Romania is showing economic prosperity due to orders from European countries, the European battle continues. After Germany occupied Belgium, its 5 armies with millions of troops invaded northern France, intending to capture Paris in one fell swoop, to force France to submit. The British and French troops, led by the French commander-in-chief Zayafei, stopped the German attempt at the Marne River in this Battle of the Marne. The quality of the generals and troops of both sides is deducted, and the automobile as a means of transportation is also eye-catching. Among them, the 12,000 trucks used by the British and French troops will be scattered from Verdun to Paris, and the troops will be quickly assembled to the Marne River to counterattack the German 1st and 2nd armies. The German army was also unambiguous, and 14,000 of the 21,000 transport trucks assigned to the right wing were mainly used to reinforce the 1st and 2nd army, mainly to support its small ammunition. To withstand the British and French attacks, trucks on both sides became the focal point of the battle, in which 600,000 troops were killed or wounded. Transport people and ammunition to the front lines, transport the wounded back to the rear, and keep trucks busy until the end of the battle. Although 10,000 of the 26,000 trucks owned by the two sides after the battle could not be used due to missing parts and were broken down by the enemy, they were still much higher than the current main energy storage transportation of the two sides after the battle. The commanders of both fronts asked the rear to replenish their trucks as much as possible, and the government in the rear could only try to collect domestic trucks and hand them over to the army. Volkswagen Dongfeng, which is now almost synonymous with trucks, is 90% of the trucks in this battle are Volkswagen Dongfeng trucks. and Volkswagen's truck orders have changed from 3 months later to 6 months later under the circumstance that the number of trucks held by the two parties cannot be changed in a short period of time. The oil used as their fuel has also become the target of competition between the two parties. After German-Austrian overseas transportation was cut off, the only Romanian oil that can be supplied to Germany and Austria has now become the focus inside the Romanian royal palace. Edel is listening to Prime Minister Bricianu's report. The British and French ambassadors approached the Prime Minister before, wanting to discuss the purchase of the entire export share of Romanian oil, and the price was not low. Of course, the Prime Minister does not dare to make a decision privately, and can only discuss this matter with the Crown Prince. Edel sat behind the desk, and asked the Prime Minister in front of him with great interest, "You mean Britain and France have agreed to buy all the refined oil we export at £8 a ton?" Looking at the Crown Prince sitting in front of him, Prime Minister Bricianu replied, "Yes." British Ambassador Richard Mann and French Ambassador Jane Budd said it himself, and it was authorized by the government. So I think it can be considered. Now Romania's annual oil production is about 3 million tons of crude oil, and after refining, 1.8 million tons of refined oil can be obtained. Moreover, the remainder of the refined oil can also be obtained from solvents and petrochemical products. So now the Romanian petrochemical industry is also at a good level in Europe. After leaving 400,000 tons of refined oil for personal use, there are also 1.4 million tons of refined oil, which is more than 11 million pounds a day. Price of £8. In the face of this huge sum of money, it is no wonder that the Prime Minister couldn't help rushing to the Crown Prince to discuss it. You must know that the government also owns 15% of the shares of oil companies, which is not a small amount for the government whose fiscal revenue has been eased only because of the outbreak of World War I. Edel looked at the obviously tempted Prime Minister and said, "Now we are not in a hurry to reply to the British and French ambassadors. When the news is released, we say that Britain and France will package all of Romania's exported refined oil." Prime Minister Bricianu is not stupid either. As soon as he heard the Crown Prince's words, he knew that he was waiting for a reply from Germany and Austria-Hungary. And now the two countries do not produce oil, and now Germany and Austria can only rely on Romanian oil to ensure their own consumption. So in the face of this news, Germany and Austria will definitely rush over to stabilize Romania. It is what the two countries are most willing to see. If all the oil exports exported by Romania can be packaged back to China. Sure enough, the day after Edel asked the Prime Minister to release the news, the German ambassador, Baslab, and the Austrian-Hungarian ambassador, Burley, came to see the Crown Prince. Edel, who had been waiting for the two ambassadors at the palace, immediately asked the guards to invite them in. His Royal Highness, may I ask if there are rumors that Britain and France want to buy all the refined oil exported from Romania? Is there such a thing? After the necessary diplomatic etiquette, Austro-Hungarian ambassador Burley hurriedly asked the Crown Prince. Facing the question of the Austro-Hungarian ambassador, Edel admitted generously, "Yes, the British and French ambassadors came to the Prime Minister before and wanted to buy all the refined oil exported by Romania. Now we are considering it." After hearing Edel's reply, German ambassador Baslöber stood up and spoke. "His Royal Highness, now Germany still owns 12.5% of the shares in the Romanian oil company. Germany has also contributed a lot to the development of Romania and now has a loan of more than 200 million marks. Therefore, I hope that His Royal Highness can take into account the deep friendship between our two countries and refuse malicious demands from Britain and France. You must know that their two countries have no shortage of oil at all, and all the oil in the world can be supplied to them." Edel also scoffed at Ambassador Baslab's words. "When are we still talking about friendship? We can only talk about interests between countries. The current hegemon, the United Kingdom, is a positive example in this regard. As long as you need you, even mortal class enemies can talk about the long history of the relationship between the two countries, even if most of them are fighting to the death." However, when facing the two ambassadors, of course he would not say this, but changed his rhetoric. However, the conditions given by Britain and France are so good that it is difficult for us to choose. Hearing the Crown Prince's words, Ambassador Baslab, who was mainly in charge of the meeting, knew that the drama was coming. He didn't hold out hope for the previous set of rhetoric, mainly to see if Edel would be like his majesty, and agreed in a moment of confusion. It just seems that the shrewd Romanian crown prince has always been IQ online point in the face of the crown prince's words. Ambassador Baslab also stated the conditions given by the two countries. We believe that the current oil price is not reasonable, and we intend to increase the price of Romanian oil to ensure the interests of both parties. He took a look at the Austro-Hungarian ambassador, Burley, and continued to speak, after being signaled by the ambassador. Our two governments have decided to increase the price of oil products exported from Romania to us to £9. Regarding Ambassador Baslab's remarks, Edel did not give a specific answer, but only mentioned it. Thanks to the two countries for their support to Romania. I still need to discuss this matter with the government, so I can't answer you directly now. I hope the two masters will forgive me. Regarding the words of the Crown Prince, both masters mentioned it. No problem, we will understand your country's difficulties. Ambassadors Baslab and Bailey know that now is the time when the two camps begin to fight for this oil producing country that is vital to Germany and Austria. They are rushing over now just to stabilize Romania and prevent it from agreeing to the terms of Britain and France in advance. And the governments of the two countries not only gave them this price, they also need to release it slowly in order to obtain sufficient benefits for their own countries. PS. According to the data, the price of oil exported from Romania to Germany and Austria is £35 per ton, and it only accepts precious metals such as gold. Considering the huge increase in demand in Germany and Austria, this price is obviously impossible, but how to write to me later. Take it slow. Chapter 195 The Battle for Oil, Part 2. After sending off the two ambassadors, Edel invited a guard to speak to him. Inform the Prime Minister that the German and Austrian ambassadors have come to visit and raise the price of Romanian oil to £9. The guard also knew what to do, so he nodded. Your Highness, I'll go right away. After the two ambassadors left the palace, Ambassador Baslab said, Ambassador Bailey, don't sit with me. Ambassador Bailey knew that it was Ambassador Baslab who had something to say to himself, so he said cheerfully, alright. I haven't eaten German sausages or drank stout in a long time. So the two ambassadors took a carriage to the German embassy on Ploiesti Street. Sausages and stout were served by the servants and the door was closed, leaving only the two ambassadors to taste the food. After seeing only two people, Ambassador Baslab was the first to speak. Ambassador Bailey, your country did not play very well in Serbia. Faced with the topic of Ambassador Baslab, Ambassador Bailey knew that this was not too good. It was just a euphemism, and it was a complete failure to describe it. Under the command of the military governor of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Ploiesti, who failed to protect the Grand Duke Ferdinand, he attacked Serbia with a 500,000 Austro-Hungarian army, only to face Serbia's 400,000 army mobilizing the whole country. They lost 5 after 10,000 people. They retreated. Faced with such a topic, Ambassador Bailey could only speak up. This is because the Russian front line needs troops, so it was abandoned halfway. But now General Ploiesti is ready this time. He will lead the army to capture Serbia again, and the country that murdered the crown prince will know the wrath of Austria-Hungary. For the German ambassador, this is a one-sided remark of Ambassador Bailey. Whether it is really that powerful depends on the level of this General Ploiesti. But he didn't mean to say this, but to make excuses. Mr. Ambassador, you know that the government's request to me this time is to ensure that Romanian oil can supply us with sufficient oil. As you can see now, we can only compete with Britain and France. Ambassador Baslab said on purpose this time. So how much did Austria-Hungary give you to buy oil? In the face of the German ambassador's inquiry, Ambassador Bailey knew that he had nothing to hide, so he said generously, domestic gave me 260 crowns per ton. Ambassador Baslab calculated in his mind that the upper limit was £11, so he also stated the price the government gave him. I gave a price of 260 marks per ton. If it is higher, I have to ask the government. As for why Germany is so much higher, Ambassador Baslab did not say, nor did Ambassador Bailey ask. However, he can also guess that the German army is now equipped with more vehicles, so the demand for oil is not comparable to Austria-Hungary. In fact, as he thought, many recent battles have reduced Germany's oil inventory to a warning level. Now the refined oil for German civilian cars is completely out of supply. Only agricultural and production units can get the supply of fuel. In addition, the government and the royal family can have a small amount of supply. So for Romania, the only country that can provide oil, they have to buy it. If there is no supply of Romanian oil, Germany will be without oil in 3 months, which is not only a military problem, but also a big problem for domestic production. Now that the two have learned about the other's low price, all they need to do is wait for a response from Britain and France. The fact that the response was quick. The British ambassador was meeting the French and Russian ambassadors while they were sitting together in the private room of the British ambassador. Jane Bard, the visiting French ambassador, spoke in a hurry. The German and Austrian ambassadors just went to the palace. As we found out, they offered the Romanians £9 a ton. Our strategy worked. Seeing the beaming faces of Ambassador Jane Bard and Ambassador Firilovsky, Ambassador Richard Mann, a veteran gentleman, also spoke with a smile. The good game is just beginning. Now we need to make the Germans lose a lot of money economically, but it is destined that this cheap can only be earned by the Romanians, the Russian Ambassador Firilovsky said enviously. This is really an enviable wealth. They don't have to do anything, and someone helps them raise prices. You must know that our oil is only sold at £2.50 a ton, and even refined oil is only sold at £4.50 a ton. They easily sell for 2x the price. This them has no one else except Romania, and the someone will obviously be the two in front of him. Hearing the envious words of the Russian ambassador, the French ambassador asked Bud to persuade him. This is nothing. As long as we defeat Germany and Austria, we have enough interests to live in. Compared with these, money, territory, and influence are the most important point. Territory was clearly more to the Russian ambassador's appetite than money. After hearing the persuasion of the French ambassador, he stopped speaking. And Russia doesn't need to import oil, nor does it have the economic power to play this money game. But the three ambassadors did not come together to discuss Romania, a lucky country, but to talk about other things. Let Ambassador Bud, how high the purchase price is given by your government. After the three of them sat down, Ambassador Richard Mann began to ask the French ambassador his own concerns in the face of the British ambassador's inquiry. Ambassador Bard told the price that the country gave him 450 francs per ton, but due to the fact that my country is under too much pressure now, it can only purchase 40% of the export volume. Ambassador Richard Mann is still not very satisfied with the price mentioned by Ambassador Jane Bard, but the price given by his own government is similar. The price given by the government on my side is £15 per ton, and the purchase volume is 50% of the export quota. He continued. It seems that we have a gap of 10%, but this is not a big problem. I believe our two governments will coordinate the work in this area. Now we neutralize the price basically at £14.50. Then it seems that we in Germany and Austria are too. There is still competition in the country. In fact, Richard Mann is still not satisfied with the price given by the country. He believes that it is completely possible to compete with Romanian oil to the price of £20 per ton. This will be a big expense for Germany, and it can be used as their naval military expense in peacetime. It's just that senior government officials are afraid that, if Germany doesn't use it, accepting it will become a hot potato. And there is no way to tell the people that buying a large amount of oil 4 times higher than the market price is to fight the enemy and strengthen itself. So the government can only give 3 times the price now, and either buy all of it, or it will become a big bleeding. For the government's order, Richard Mann can't do anything about it. After all, he is just an ambassador, not living in 10 Downing Street. Then Ambassador Richard Mann discussed with the French and Russian ambassadors how the 3 countries could let Germany and Austria fall into the trap and fall into blood loss. Among them, the Russian ambassador did not say a word and watched the whole process. The government negotiation was also very fast, and the results of the negotiation were sent in the evening. Among them, France still has a 40% share of imported high-priced oil, but the price has been increased to £15, and the British government will purchase the remaining 60% of the share for the French price increase. After the negotiation between the two countries, the British and French ambassadors have enough confidence to let Germany and Austria dance with their baton. Chapter 196 The Battle for Oil, Part 2. The German and Austrian ambassadors expressed to Edel the offers of the two countries for the latest Romanian oil products the next morning. As if to demonstrate against Germany and Austria, the British and French ambassadors rushed to the Prime Minister's residence. Prime Minister Bricianu, who was working, received the report from his subordinates and immediately let the two ambassadors come in. Prime Minister Bricianu pretended not to know and asked the two visiting ambassadors, "I don't know what the two ambassadors have to do with me." The two ambassadors ignored the Romanian Prime Minister, who was showing his acting skills in front of them. Of course, they both knew each other's goals. "We are here to buy Romanian oil this time." The British and French ambassadors' straight to the point explanations meant that Prime Minister Bricianu knew that it was time to get down to business. He preached earnestly. The two ambassadors should know that Dia has bid £9 a ton. We all know. Prime Minister Bricianu was satisfied with the answer from the British and French ambassadors and continued to speak. "I wonder how much the two ambassadors can offer this time." This time, the French ambassador let Bud speak. "We are prepared to bid £10 a ton this time, but we need to sell all the oil we need for export." The price quoted by the French ambassador left Prime Minister Bricianu in a trance. Before the war, Romania's national finance was only more than £20 million, but now only half of the oil is sold every year, which also made him an eye-opener. "Thank you for your liking for Romanian oil. I will inform the Crown Prince of the quotations of the two countries. I believe this price will have a satisfactory result." Prime Minister Bricianu came back and said this with a pun. He knew that if Romania was not the only oil importer for Germany and Austria, where can I sell this price? Before the war, Romania's oil exports to other countries were only £2 per ton, and after the war the price was only £4.50. So if it is not unique, how can such a good thing come to Romania? After the two ambassadors talked about the latest oil prices, they continued to chat with Bricianu for a while. In particular, the French ambassador Jean Bud discussed with the Prime Minister about his experience of studying in Paris. After sending off the two British and French ambassadors, Prime Minister Bricianu immediately released the news that the British and French prices were increased to £10 per ton. "I believe that the German and Austrian embassies will be busy late tonight." Sure enough, the message sent by Prime Minister Bricianu was not in vain. At noon, the German ambassador Baslab and the Austro-Hungarian ambassador Burley received the news. Did not expect the British and French ambassadors to react so quickly, and directly mentioned the price of £10 per ton, which made them feel a little prickly. In particular, the Austro-Hungarian ambassador, Burley, is the most nervous, which has approached the price limit given to him by the government. So after getting this news, he hurried to the German embassy to ask Ambassador Baslab to discuss countermeasures. Ambassador Baslab looked eagerly at his ambassador Bailey, the poking attitude towards the British and French ambassadors. He also had a headache. It's just that there is no other way now, but the two sides can only fight for economic strength. So he spoke to Ambassador Bailey. "You'd better inform your government of the current situation in Romania and let them raise the current price limit. I will also inform our government of this situation. According to my estimation, the price the government has given me now seems to be not enough." After hearing the words of the German ambassador, Ambassador Bailey thought that he could only do this. Now Britain and France have made it clear that they will use economic means to restrain them, and now they can only let the two sides compete for economic strength. He spoke to Ambassador Baslab. "I will go back to the embassy to send a report to the country. Now this is related to the common interests of both of us, so I hope our two countries can support each other." Ambassador Baslab knew that this was what Ambassador Bailey hoped, that the German side would take on a little more. What supports each other is that Germany supports Austria-Hungary. It's just that now the two countries have become grasshoppers on the same line, and no one can run away, so he can only acquiesce to Ambassador Bailey's words. In the afternoon, they sent telegrams to the country. The Austria-Hungary Empire sent a telegram to Germany in the evening to ask for help because of the gap in economic strength. Now the problem is concentrated in the hands of the German government and the Kaiser and General Moltke, who have been focusing on the war situation, rarely let go of the war situation because of this problem, and discuss with Prime Minister Hulwig the oil issue that has been ignored by them. In this special meeting for the Romanian oil, it is still the Prime Minister Hulwig who is still in charge of government work. to describe the current situation in Romania. Finally he concluded, according to my estimation, this time, if we want to keep the import of Romanian oil, we need to spend a lot of money. After listening to the Prime Minister's speech, the German Emperor was the first to ask General Much, now that the German army is attacking the city in northern France, his opinion is the most important point. General Moltke, do you think our need for oil is a necessity? If so, how much should we pay to get it? In the face of the Emperor's inquiry, General Malky said, after sorting out his thoughts, Your Majesty, in this war, the use of vehicles has greatly exceeded the storage capacity. Economically, even a ton of oil of 00 marks can compete with the storage capacity. However, in terms of efficiency, vehicles are still faster and more convenient. So I think oil is a necessity in our war. After Admiral Moltke finished speaking, Admiral Tirpitz also spoke. Your Majesty, our navy ships also need fuel for travel. Now that the fuel in the Empire's inventory has reached the warning level, seeking to replenish it is the only way. Now the German Navy has not changed its power from coal to fuel, but this does not mean that the Navy will not use oil. When its warships are dispatched, it will also pour heavy oil on the coal to improve the combustion efficiency. Moreover, not all naval ships use coal, and many small ships that pursue efficiency have been converted to fuel power. But Marshal Tirpitz continued, we in the Admiralty are working on plans to restrict the export of substances from Romania to other countries. William II asked with interest, what plan is this? Marshal Tirpitz talked about it smugly. This plan is mainly to win an ally for us, but also to prevent Russia from getting material supplies through the Black Sea. Restricting Romanian exports is only a side effect. All the ministers present here are talented people, so I have already guessed it without him talking about the script in detail. However, this will not ease Germany's demand for Romanian oil, and the feasibility of competing for its oil still needs to be discussed. After the Navy Secretary's speech, Prime Minister Hollweg also spoke about the economic needs. Your Majesty, we need Romania's oil now. Many machinery in agriculture need it, and many chemical plants must use its petrochemical raw materials to produce it. After hearing the opinions of the three ministers that he valued very much, William II continued to ask, so what is the economic price we can afford now? There is no way this oil price will continue to rise. Tatatoan William II asked impatiently. There was a knock on the door. Come in. The Emperor, who was interrupted, did not show dissatisfaction. He knew that it was probably due to urgent matters at this time. Sure enough, a guard came in and spoke with a telegram. This is a telegram from Vienna. The Kaiser took over the telegram and glanced at it briefly, and after reading it, he told the ministers in front of him, this is a telegram from Austria-Hungary asking for our help, also about the oil. After speaking, he handed the telegram to the ministers, circulated to each other and asked, what shall we do now? Prime Minister Hollweg knew it was time for him to come forward. Your Majesty is actually a problem. Not only do we need oil, but Austria-Hungary also needs it. Then we can inform them after the negotiation results, and at most we can give them a little subsidy to help. After hearing the Prime Minister's words, William II murmured in a low voice, and General Much, who was sitting next to him, seemed to hear that these Austrians need our help in everything. The Kaiser then asked, so how do we reply to the ambassador in Romania? General Much said, I think 00 marks is a good price, and I believe that the Romanians will not reject our kindness. Admiralty Tirpitz agreed. I also think the price is reasonable. Prime Minister Hollweg knew it was time to speak for himself. I also agree with the proposal of the two ministers, but I need to add that, if Romania can accept our use of mechanical equipment to offset the oil payment, then it can be higher. After hearing the unanimous approval of the important ministers he trusted, William II also approved this method. So he spoke to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister sent this message to the ambassador to Romania, and let him know the importance of this, hoping that he could take Romania's share of oil exports for the Empire. So Ambassador Baslab in Romania was given sufficient power to negotiate the matter at home, and also the Austrian-Hungarian ambassador Burley was given this power. So in the following week, German and Austrian ambassadors with sufficient funds and British and French ambassadors began to compete fiercely for Romanian oil. They fought back and forth at each price point, and after a week, the German ambassador, who had no strings attached, was victorious then. In the presence of Prime Minister Briceanu, they signed a supply contract with the Romanian oil company. In this contract, Romania guarantees to provide at least 4 million tons of refined oil and 2.5 million tons of petrochemical products to Germany and Austria within 3 years. Among them, the price of refined oil, which is the most important, was traded at a comprehensive price of $75 per ton, and the total contract value reached £90 million. In terms of payment methods, Romania requires that precious metals such as US dollars or gold be the payment currency. 15% of the payment will be for Romania to purchase German machinery and equipment, and the price of the equipment cannot be higher than 20% before the war broke out. As a concession to Germany for such a huge contract, Romania needs to pay Germany's money every year to purchase oil products. However, the annual repayment in Romania is only 20 million marks each year, which can only be considered better than nothing. So the competition for Romanian oil also ended with the signing of this contract. PS. Book friends will keep the monthly passes for next month for Mantau. I will make 2 updates every day since June, and if there are more awards, I will add more. Tomorrow, on Children's Day, the steamed bread will be guaranteed. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197 List of military observers. After the competition between the two major groups for Romanian oil was completed, Edel also put down his mind in this regard. Now the war in Europe is the main theme. Although Romania is still mainly developing its economy, it still pays enough attention to this war after all. There are many new military theories and technologies used in the European war, and Romania also needs first-hand information, so it is urgent to send a military observation team. Today, Admiral Precian took the list of the two major groups stationed in Romania and handed it over to the Crown Prince for inspection and approval. Then these heroes of the Romanian army can closely observe the development of the war and see the military level of the European powers. You can let your own army find out its strengths and weaknesses, correct and improve its strength. In the palace, Priest Hill will hand the list to the Crown Prince and talk about it. His Royal Highness, this is the list prepared by our staff. Your Highness can check it out. Edel took over the list and glanced at it briefly. There were many talents in the army that he knew. Among them, Lieutenant Colonel Sandprot, Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu, and Major Hoffman covered all the professionals of the known army, and they were only officers of the observation group sent by the army. The list of naval officers is also above, among them Lieutenant Colonel Midrafiel, Lieutenant Colonel Tascoku, Major Bielk, etc. are also candidates he has seen. Moreover, the head of the military observation mission dispatched to the Allied countries is the newly appointed Deputy Commander of the 3rd Division, Major General Dorex. He was promoted after the former Deputy Commander of the 3rd Division, Major General Kledov, was promoted to the Commander of the 15th Division. Before that, he was the brigade commander of the 2nd Brigade of the 12th Division, and he performed well in the Second Balkan War, so he was promoted to the deputy commander of the 3rd Division. Being able to serve as the head of the military observation group this time is also related to his experience. He studied in the German military school before, and was able to understand the command and operation of the German army. But more than that, he is only 38 years old this year, and he is more able to accept new things, so he was named by General Pili Mountain as the head of the regiment. The other head of the regiment stationed in the Allied countries is Major General Bordopu, Deputy Division Commander of the 1st Division. This Major General does not have as much energy as Major General Darlux, but he is also a well-known person in the army, who is familiar with the French army. Therefore, he was named by Admiral Precian and asked him to lead the military observation group on matters in France. It seems that, in order to make the elites of the Romanian army feel modern warfare, the Chief of the General Staff, Admiral Precian, also took great pains. Edel was pleased with the list presented by Admiral Precian. As for accidental casualties, it's just bad luck. No one can guarantee their own safety in a dangerous place like the battlefield. Just follow the list above. After reading the list, Edel handed the list of 93 people to Admiral Pretian. As for the surprise, he was only surprised that Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu was on the list. I haven't seen this later dictator for a few years, and I didn't expect that he was still put in by the Chief of Staff, Ploiesti, and the rank was also mentioned as a lieutenant colonel. However, considering that this person also has a good commanding ability in the history of later generations, it makes sense that he still stands out without being taken care of by the Crown Prince. Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu, who did not know that he was missed, was chatting with other officers who would be dispatched in the future. This time, Admiral Puri first called up the officers and then handed the list to the Crown Prince to check. It's not that Admiral Pretian has inflated, but he has this confidence that the Crown Prince will not refute the candidates on the list. Now these officers are taking advantage of this rare opportunity to get to know each other. After all, everyone is usually very busy. If you don't take this opportunity to learn more about it, there won't be many such opportunities in the future. So everyone is walking to each other, otherwise the painstaking efforts of the Chief of Staff Ploiesti to arrange them together will be wasted. However, there are still people who do not understand the painstaking efforts of the Chief of the General Staff. For example, the major named Hoffman in front of Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu. Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu walked to the door of this room inadvertently after getting to know many colleagues and saw Major Hoffman still lying on the table to deal with his own problems. Of course, if Major Hoffman didn't say it, new terms such as wheeled armored vehicle, tracked armored vehicle, and how should armored vehicles command infantry to fight together, then Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu had already turned around and left, and of course he couldn't leave after hearing this. He is well informed. After being valued by Ploiesti, he can get a lot of information from the staff, not to mention that he has worked in the staff. Now that he is a cavalry officer, he is also very interested in the armored experimental battalion that he has established. Now, when he encounters this main person in charge, of course he cannot miss the opportunity to discuss it. So he went into the room and discussed the use of armored vehicles with Major Hoffman. And Major Hoffman was of course dissatisfied with Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu, who suddenly walked in, but he was also inspired by his thinking after talking with the Lieutenant Colonel. Because Major Hoffman was born as a military academy teacher, he strives to understand many issues thoroughly, so he hesitates when many choices are needed, showing his nerd qualities. In the past few years, his rotation in the army has reduced this breadth a lot, but it is still obvious sometimes when he has not completely separated. Because Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu has been serving in the cavalry, he has only worked in the staff for 2 years, so he has a radiant thinking. Now when two people with different thinking get along, they can get different ideas from each other's mouth. So now the two people have developed from not knowing each other to talking very quickly. Now Major Hoffman is asking about his consideration of the model of the armored vehicle on the opposite side. Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu, which of these two armored vehicles do you think is in line with the current development? I think how you want to use it. For example, you said that the wheeled armored vehicle can only run on the road. I think you have a good reference object is the armored train, which can only run on the railway. And tracked armored vehicles are slow, just like the heavy cavalry that was eliminated before. Although the speed is slow, they are also armored that the enemy cannot penetrate. So you can consider from two aspects facing Hoffman's problems. Antonescu could only find comparisons from what he knew, but fortunately he did a good job. Facing Antonescu's words, Hoffman was very enlightened, and he happily told the officer he had just met, "It seems that we need tracked armored vehicles to overcome the enemy's defense lines, but now tracked vehicles are not fast." Antonescu asked curiously, "Now how fast can the tracked armored vehicle you're talking about run?" Faced with the question of the newly acquainted Lieutenant Colonel, Hoffman also gave the answer. It can only run 15 or 6 kilometers per hour now, and there are quite a few failures. I'll let the people in the design department of Volkswagen continue to improve, and the minimum failure rate must be reduced. When Antonescu was about to continue his questioning, he suddenly heard the broadcast. "Attention, all officers participating in the military observation mission are assembled in the lobby." The two quickly put down the topic and left the room. and gathered in the hall with the officers, who came out together. When they arrived in the hall, they lined up in order of their height. Army officers in dark green troops lined up in 4 rows, while naval officers in sky blue military uniforms lined up in 2 rows. And they are about the same height, so the 2 are lined up together. After lining up, the 2 leaders, Major General Dorex and Major General Bordopu, walked in front of them. Now the officer whose name I read will go with me to the Allied front as a military observer, and the other officers will go to the Allies with General Bordopu. After Major General Dorex finished speaking, he suddenly asked loudly, "Did you hear everything clearly?" The straight officers standing in front of them shouted in unison, "Clear." Major General Dorex nodded with satisfaction and began to read his name. Colonel Bosk River, Colonel Wedel River, Lieutenant Colonel Sanprode River. Major General Dorex read his name. Antonescu whispered to Hoffman, "It's better if we can get together." Hoffman felt that the lieutenant colonel he had just met was not bad, so he responded in a low voice, "Hope so." At this time, Major General Dorex chanted loudly, "Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu." Antonescu answered with a straight back, as if his condition was reversed. Arrive. And after the entire list of Major General Dorex was read, there was still no Major Hoffman's name, and it seemed that their wish was going to fail. In fact, this list shows that the officers are going to the outstanding part of the country, where they are located. For example, Lieutenant Colonel Antonescu is a cavalry officer, and he will be assigned to the eastern front of Germany. Major Hoffman was an armored vehicle officer and was placed on the British and French side, where there were more armored vehicles. Major General Dorex said loudly after reading, "You have 2 days left, and then you will gather here. Major General Bordeaux and I will take you to the battlefield separately. Don't forget to prepare a suicide note. Even military observers will be in danger." After speaking, Major General Dorex shouted loudly, "Disband." So the officers who were gathered together scattered, and now they will rush to the front in 2 days, although not fighting, but each officer is heavy in his heart. Chapter 198, New Life. He didn't work long after Red assigned the list of military observers. When the sun was about to set, a guard hurried into the Crown Prince's office. Before he could ask, the guard said it. The Crown Princess was unwell just now. Dr. Odsk has checked that the Crown Princess is about to give birth. The guard's words made Edel unable to work, and he asked nervously, "Where is my wife now?" In the face of the Crown Prince's question, the guard replied, "His Royal Highness, now the Crown Prince has been placed in the delivery room." After hearing the guard's words, Edel quickly left his office and hurried to the delivery room. The maternity ward for Sophie Mary's birth was ready in June, in a very well located room with a view of the morning sun and a garden outside the window. When Edel rushed to the door of the delivery room, he heard his wife Sophie Mary screaming in pain. Her mother Queen Elizabeth also arrived at this time. She saw Edel, who was already standing here, and said something to him. "I'll go in and have a look. You and father are waiting here." After speaking, the mother entered the delivery room, leaving Edel to watch the medical staff who came in and out. At this time, Caroline also came over with the support of Viscount Adri, the chief steward, and the Crown Prince stepped forward to support his father, softly persuaded, "Father, you are not in good health. Why did you come here like this?" Caroline, who was supported by Edel, was in good spirits despite his poor health. He spoke in a cheerful tone. "I want to see my little grandson born and hear his first cry." After hearing the wishes of Caroline, Edel helped his father to wait on the bench outside the door. This time, after his father came back from the Peresh Palace vacation, his body collapsed badly. At the beginning of this month, he even needed someone to walk, which made Edel feel that his father was running out of time. Now Caroline doesn't ask about current affairs at all, and now his only wish is to see his grandson born. After Edel settled his father, he waited anxiously outside the delivery room. The cry of his wife Sophie Mary came from the delivery room, making Edel restless, and could only walk back and forth to relieve the pressure. After a while, Queen Elizabeth came out, and Edel saw astride and asked, "Mother, what's going on inside?" Seeing anxious and son, Queen Elizabeth spoke in the tone of someone who had come before. "How can it be so fast now? It takes at least 2 to 3 hours. But I asked Dr. Odsk, and she said that the fetus is currently in a good position and I believe it will be delivered smoothly." Hearing his mother's comfort reassures Edel. At least it's good news for now. so he was at ease with his parents at the door waiting for his wife to give birth to the first 3 generations of the Romanian royal family. They didn't wait long, and Prime Minister Brătianu also came with many nobles. A group of people saw the king's family outside the door, so they also waited quietly beside them. Only a few nobles, prime ministers, etc. could come forward to speak to the king's family. Now Romania's aristocrats can still talk about their days, but their political influence has been waning after decades of suppression by the Carol and his son. However, with the process of Romania's industrialization, the economy has barely recovered some losses and there is no influence in the army at all. Especially in 1905, the actions of Count Firanscu and others caused the influence of the nobles in the army to be suppressed. The generals who can now hold power in the army are all loyal to the royal family, and others such as Democrats are also excluded from the army. So now the Romanian army has completely become an armed force controlled by the royal family. Prime Minister Brătianu, after seeing the restless crown prince, he spoke softly. Please rest assured, your highness, I believe that God will bless the crown princess to give birth to the child smoothly. For the prime minister's comfort, Edel turned around and replied casually, thank you, your excellency, for your concern. It is absolutely impossible for me to calm down now. After all, this is my first child. He also understands the performance of the crown prince, knowing that when his first child was born, his performance was no better than that of Edel, and he was just as restless after the prime minister persuaded the crown prince. He did not continue to speak. He came to persuade him to do his duty as a courtier. After he finished speaking, he stood by and waited for the birth of the child. A group of people listened to the cry of the crown princess and waited quietly for the birth of the child. But just like to keep everyone waiting, the child in Sophie Mary's womb was reluctant to meet everyone. A group of people waited from the early evening until the lights were bright. The news that the crown princess was in production was also spread all over the streets of Bucharest. So today there was a spectacular scene. The streets were filled with people waiting for news, and most of the vehicles driving on the road also stopped on the road. They all looked in the direction of the palace in unison, waiting for the news of the birth of the crown prince and concubine. Many citizens also spontaneously prayed for the crown prince and the child in her womb, and let God bless the mother and child. It seems that seeing his own birth scene is grand enough. At 10:12 p.m., with Sophie Mary's heart-wrenching cry, followed by a baby cry, everyone standing outside the delivery room breathed a sigh of relief. At a time when childbirth is still a hurdle for mothers and children, Edel is waiting for good news from Dr. Odsk. Sure enough, the people outside the delivery room were not allowed to wait for a long time. Dr. Odsk came out and said to the crown prince within 2 minutes, congratulations, your highness, mother and son are safe. After hearing the news, Edel felt in his heart that he had left a bloodline in this world, and he had integrated into this world. Edel pushed aside the crowd surrounding him congratulating him, and strode into the delivery room. He saw his recovering wife Sophie Mary still lying on the bed, and he walked over to wipe the sweat on his wife's forehead and said affectionately, good work, Sophie. Sophie Mary, who was comforted by her husband, replied, this is what I should do. After she finished speaking, she looked at the baby. She was being held by the medical staff. The female nurse was also very sensible and quickly held the baby in front of Sophie Mary. Two highnesses, look at how cute he is. Sophie Mary looked at her child and smiled, and Edel also looked at her son and felt a happy life. Where is my grandson? I want to see him. It didn't take long for the Edels to feel happy. Queen Elizabeth came over and hugged her grandson from the nurse, followed by King Carol, who was supported by the chief of the court. The old king said happily as he looked at his grandson being held by his wife, my little grandson is so cute, just like Edel was born. Carol spoke to Edel after seeing his grandson. My grandson's name is Friedrich Victor Albert von Hohenzollern Sigmaringen. Edel knew that this was the name that his father was worried about not being able to attend his grandson's baptism, so he prepared it in advance. So he reiterated the bias very seriously. Yes, my son is named Friedrich Victor Albert von Hohenzollern Sigmaringen. So the newly born little prince was called Prince Victor. Carol was very happy to hear it and told the court chief beside him, Let the bell ring and tell the subjects that the royal family has a little prince. Your majesty, I have already sent someone to do it. At this time, the bell of the palace rang, and then the bells of the cathedrals also rang, which was to inform the subjects that the child was born. Chapter 199 Reserve Improvement Plan. After the birth of the crown prince's child, the Romanian people are very fond of the new little prince. In the cathedral of the last chief, the baptism of the abbot of Patriarch Bardacquani was also crowded, and everyone couldn't wait to see the new prince. It is also rare for Edel to accompany his family without dealing with government affairs during this period of time. Mainly concerned with Sophie Mary and Prince Victor, who had just finished giving birth, and his aging father, Carol I, who often accompanied him. However, such a leisurely time did not last long. In less than a week, he had to pick up government affairs again and start to deal with it. Edel now picked up the document he was looking at, that is, General Courtois, the Minister of the Army, and General Pratian, the Chief of the General Staff, jointly submitted a plan to improve the reserve. This plan, which is related to the army's major moves, is still brought to the Crown Prince by Admiral Pratian this time. Looking at Edel, who was reading through it carefully, Ploiesti felt much more troubled in his heart. He was afraid that the Crown Prince would not understand the importance of this plan. This is what he and the Minister of the Army carefully prepared, by drawing on the advantages of the reserve plans of various countries, and combining the actual situation in Romania. However, it seems that his worries are superfluous at present, and the Crown Prince is watching with relish. To say that the strength of the Romanian army is definitely ahead of other countries in the Balkans. Just relying on artillery with a larger caliber than other small countries can show Romania's wealth, not to mention that the number of Romanian artillery is also unmatched by them. It's just that Edel's goals now are the Austro-Hungarian army and the Soviet army born out of the Russian army, so his small but elite Romanian army alone cannot accomplish the above goals, so the Romanian domestic reserve must be mobilized. Relying on Romania's abundant manpower in the Balkan countries, Romania maintains a reserve force of 400,000 all year round. They usually work in the fields and factories, and will take up arms to fight the enemy when the country needs them. There are reserves in all walks of life in Romania, and even Romania has a reserve company of bankers, and when using these reserves, the Romanian military can only expect them to be recruited into the army and dispersed as supplementary soldiers. However, Romania's finances could only support the transformation and reorganization of its army before, so it was more than enough to transform the reserve system. Now with the outbreak of World War I, when Romania's finances are improving, the two army leaders put this long prepared plan in front of Edel. In this reserve transformation plan, the two army leaders first unified the various types of rifles in the reserve and replaced them with Mauser 98 rifles used by the army. This move consumes 210,000 Mauser rifles out of the army's 310,000 Mauser 98 rifles. However, because the Romanian arsenal is now working overtime, it does not take 2 years to replenish the inventory. In addition, in this plan, they will also train their personnel to use machine guns and artillery, which will consume 746 machine guns and 168 artillery pieces in the army's inventory, which still need to be supplemented by the arsenal. After strengthening the weapons of these reserves, of course, their training time also needs to be strengthened, from 5 days of training per month to 7 days per month, and there will be a month of separate training in winter when there is no farm work. This will increase the training time of the previous reserve service from 60 days per year and 2 months to 107 days and 3.5 months, and those who train these reserve soldiers in the program will be replaced by serving military officers, and the reserve officers who were previously responsible for training them will also be pooled to train their military skills through the intensive training of these reserve officers and soldiers. The Romanian reserve forces will be greatly enhanced. Moreover, in order to allow these reserve officers and soldiers to train with peace of mind, allowances were also increased in this plan. In the past, the reservists had no allowances, and their combat effectiveness was maintained entirely by the patriotic enthusiasm of the people. Therefore, the Romanian reserves were not trained at a high level before, and it was not easy to manage. Now that the generals believe that the reserve is also a part of the Romanian army, so they give each soldier 50 lei per year. The average allowance for the lieutenant is about 70 lei per person per year, and the average allowance for the school level is 100 lei per person per year. However, the army does not intend to pay all of this money by itself. In this plan, the two generals believed that, because of the half military and half military nature of the reserve, the government would also contribute half, relying on the tense situation of the European war. In the end, Prime Minister Bricianu pinched his nose and acquiesced to the rogues of the two generals. Therefore, the funds to support the 400,000 reservists each year are divided between the government and the army. In fact, weapons and ammunition cost more than Berks, which cost more. You must know that, if you follow the training intensity of the army, then these reserve soldiers will consume a lot of ammunition. Fortunately, Romanian ammunition production has now been expanded several times, which can support the two admirals' plans, and at the end, the two admirals also figured out how to use these intensively trained reservists. First, before the outbreak of the war, the officers who prepared and trained them were formed into independent battalion-level units, and then a regiment was recruited and replenished from each division, to form a new division-level unit with them. As for the technical arms of this division, it is also composed of the non-commissioned officers, provided by the selected division as the backbone, and the reserve technical officers and soldiers trained before supplementation. On the whole, it has the style of the Japanese army in World War II, but there is no division of soldiers for each division, and there is no military class as perverted as the Japanese army. Edel still agreed with the whole plan after reading it, but he still had to ask the chief of staff a few questions before making a decision. Admiral Ploiesti, according to your plan, how to solve the second wave of mobilization. After hearing the Crown Prince's inquiry, Prezhan knew that this was precisely the part they didn't write into the plan. It turned out that he and Courtois had disagreements about the second mobilization. In his opinion, after the second mobilization, to expand the scope of conscription, the conscripts will be sent to the military camp for training for 2 months, and then they will go to the battlefield in the form of supplementary soldiers, and General Courtois believes that doing so is too dangerous for the small country of Romania. Once the second mobilization is launched, it may be against opponents such as Austria, Hungary and Russia, whose manpower cannot be compared with that of the great powers. Therefore, he believes that it is necessary to establish a second-level mobilization agency. During training, these people can reduce the training time to 2 months or 1.5 months each year, which is much better than having them on the battlefield after 2 months of training. Admiral Ploiesti mainly considered that it would require more weapons and ammunition to support such a secondary mobilization mechanism, which is too burdensome for the current army, so he does not agree. Now, in the face of the Crown Prince's inquiry, Admiral Ploiesti had no choice but to ask this question. Edel, after listening to Prezhan's account, knew that Romania's participation in World War I was necessary, and now the Romanian army plus reserves is only 700,000. Even if the army continues to expand to a maximum of 1 million in the future, there is still a lot of gap in the current general recruitment ratio of various countries. Therefore, he is more accepting of the proposal of the Secretary of the Army. So Edel, after thinking about it, told Admiral Ploiesti, at present, it seems that Admiral Courtois's plan is not bad. You should think more about his plan for secondary mobilization, and come up with a supplementary plan. After Edel finished speaking, Shushu signed his name on the reserve transformation plan. So in early October 1914, Romania began to implement a new reserve program. Chapter 200, The Death of the King. While Edel was busy for the army reserve these days, the old King Carolai was gradually dying. It seems that the birth of the little Prince Victor has made him relax the breath he has been supporting until now. Now that the old king has difficulty walking with support, everyone now knows that the days of the monarch who led Romania to independence and gave it decades of development and prosperity are numbered. Faced with the situation of their own monarch, the Romanian people also spontaneously prayed for this majestic king, hoping that he could continue to lead Romania to prosperity. It's just that the years have not been changed by anyone's will, and it has brought too much vitality to the monarch. Now death waits silently to take the life of the monarch. Point. After dealing with the military reservists, Edel also tried to accompany his father, who was short on time. Many politicians and former prime ministers are now in Bucharest, where they will witness the first handover of Romanian kingship. Point. On the night of October 9th, Prime Minister Bricianu was ready to go to bed. Now the government has a lot of work during the day, but he looked at the economic prosperity caused by the outbreak of the war. In his heart, he thought that in this situation, he has the ability to achieve a super explosive growth of more than 25% in the Romanian economy. Only now he is chatting with his wife at bedtime. The king is dying now. I wonder if the country can develop peacefully like the old king after the crown prince takes the throne. Prime Minister Bricianu replied after hearing his wife's words. It's impossible. Our crown prince is a man of great ambition. It's just a question of whether Romania can withstand his ambition. Tatatev Prime Minister and his wife were talking about the crown prince when there was a sudden knock on the door, which made the prime minister and his wife jump. It's okay to talk about the crown prince in private, but who made him prime minister? Prime Minister Bricianu asked loudly through the gate. What's up? The familiar voice of the housekeeper who has been serving for many years came. Master, the palace sent someone to let you rush over. The king is dying. After hearing the housekeeper's words, Prime Minister Bricianu quickly put on his clothes and said to his wife, I don't think I can come back tonight. You can rest by yourself. The prime minister's wife knew that her husband needed to go to the palace at this time, so she also talked about it. You also pay more attention to take care of your body. Prime Minister Bricianu followed the housekeeper to meet the guard who was passing news in the living room and was taking the guard's car to the palace. Of course, he was not the only one who was urgently recruited into the palace. Former Prime Minister Stulia, Minister of War, General Courtois, Chief of the General Staff, General Prezhan, the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church and others were all recruited into the palace. The handover of the Romanian crown will also be overdue. Under their witness, the royal family has now gathered around the old king. The head of the Romanian royal family, the Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen family in Germany, also sent people here. The people who came this time are also very interesting. It was Edel's cousin Ferdinand who came on behalf of the Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen family. What's interesting is that this Duke Ferdinand, who is more than 10 years older than Edel, was the king of Romania in his previous life, but now he is unlucky when he encounters Edel, a future traveler, and grabs the throne. In Caroline's room, Queen Elizabeth stood affectionately beside the sleeping King Carol, stroking her husband's cheeks, which were already full of wrinkles. It's just that the king did not respond to this. The Edel stood beside the queen, and Sophie Mary was holding the little Prince Victor in her arms. The crown prince looked at his father, who was lethargic in front of him. He turned to look at Viscount Adri, who had been with the old king, and asked in a tone that could not hide his anger, "What's the matter with my father?" The palace steward spoke in a remorseful tone with red eyes. "Just now, His Majesty wanted to read the book, and I was going to get it. But His Majesty insisted on taking it by himself, so I helped him to go there. Who knew that, when I walked to the door, His Majesty's foot slipped, and I didn't help him, and then it became like this." After Viscount Adri finished speaking, the old man in his 60s burst into tears like a child who had suffered a catastrophic disaster. Seeing the appearance of the old man who has served the royal family for decades, Edel couldn't blame him, so he had to persuade him to talk about it. "Uncle Adrien doesn't blame you, don't blame yourself like this." Hearing what the crown prince used to call him when he was a child, the palace steward stopped crying, but still kept tears silently. At this time, a guard walked up to the crown prince and whispered, "The prime minister, the patriarch and others have arrived." Edel replied, "Understood." The little Prince Victor, who was in Sophie Mary's arms, seemed to wake up and began to cry, and the originally quiet room became noisy for a while. Sophie Mary was busy coaxing her son. Carol Kingdom seemed to be startled by the cry of the little prince. He opened his eyes and looked at the wives and children beside him. Queen Elizabeth looked at her husband, who had woken up, and said in surprise, "Carol, you're awake." "How long have I slept?" "In less than 2 hours, Elizabeth. I feel like I'm about to be called by the Lord." "Queen, I can't keep my wedding vows and promise to be with you. I hope you don't blame me. Listening to her husband's words, Queen Elizabeth covered her mouth and said while crying, "No, I know Carl, you've always kept your word. Edel father, I'm here. Hearing his father's call, the crown prince quickly walked to his side and held his father's withered hand. Queen Elizabeth knew that her husband had a lot to say to her son now, so she asked everyone else in the room to leave for the time being. After only the king and his son were left, Caroline said, "Edel, I'm not worried about your ability as a king now. Your grades are much better than mine. Now I just want to ask without taking any regrets, are you going to participate in this war?" Edel looked at Caroline, who was really looking at him and didn't hide it. "I will bring Romania to the battlefield. The allies. Yes, father, we can only join the allies in this war." Hearing his son's unreserved words, Caroline was not angry either. "My son has no experience growing up in Germany, so it is understandable that he has no feelings for this country." So Caroline continued to speak. "Edel, you are more like the king of Romania than I am. But I don't blame you. I just hope you can provide the necessary help when the Hohenzollern Sigmaringen family is in trouble. It should be possible." Edel promises the Sigmaringen family, which his father haunts. "Father, you just didn't say we'd help them. After all, my name is Hohenzollern Sigmaringen." After Caroline got his son's promise, he also gave up his mind and told him about it. "Let those ministers come in. They should have been waiting for a long time." Okay. Father Edel opened the door of the room and spoke to the crowd waiting outside the door. "Now everyone come in." As the crown prince finished speaking, the prime minister, former prime ministers, senior military officials, and religious leaders all walked into the king's room, and of course the royal family was among them. More than a dozen people walked into the king's room, filling the originally empty space immediately. Caroline greeted these people one by one and chatted with them. Everyone knows what they're here for, so I'll keep it short and try to save time. After greeting them, Caroline asked Crown Prince Edel to come to him, and he sat up and spoke to the ministers and the military in front of him. As the Crown Prince of Romania, Edel von Hohenzollern Sigmaringen is undoubtedly a qualified monarch. After my death, he will inherit the Romanian throne. You will pledge to the Crown Prince to honor your oath. The government and military dignitaries present, as well as nobles, all knelt on one knee, held their chests, and lowered their heads. "We would like to keep our oath and let God witness this moment." After watching them do all this, Caroline seemed to have exhausted all his strength and fell into the arms of Edel, who came to catch him. Caroline died in Bucharest at 1:18 am on October 10th at the age of 75. Reigned for 48 years. Now Romania is going through the period of Caroline and will usher in the rule of King Edel. So how the new king will lead Romania and seek the greatest benefit in this war will be its main task now. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.